I still remember the first time I drove into that place. Back then, I was still new to the badge, still carrying that restless pride of being the one people could call when things went wrong. But nothing in the academy, nothing in all those late-night shifts, could have prepared me for the kind of silence I found there. The call came in just after noon. Dispatch said someone had reported a possible disturbance in an old mining town on the edge of the county. Place had a name, but I don't think saying it out loud matters anymore. It barely existed even then. Population had been thinning for years. Families moving away after the mines shut down, businesses closing one after another until the whole place was more memory than town. Still, duty was duty. I was told to drive out there, check the streets, make sure everything was all right. The highway out was quiet, even for a weekday. I remember glancing at the clock on the dash, 12:47 p.m., and thinking how strange it felt that no one else was on the road. No truckers, no cars, not even a biker. Just me, my cruiser, and the endless stretch of asphalt cutting through brown fields. When I finally turned off the main road, I felt a shift. Like the world had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. The dirt road wound past empty farmland, barbed wire fences leaning, weeds growing high where cattle used to graze. The farther I drove, the heavier the stillness pressed in, and then suddenly, there it was, the town. From a distance, it looked almost normal. Rows of buildings, a main street lined with shops, the old water tower still standing against the sky. But the closer I got, the clearer it became. Something was wrong. The streets were empty. Not just quiet, empty. No kids riding bikes, no shop owners sweeping their sidewalks, no dogs barking behind fences. Windows stood open, curtains fluttering slightly in the warm air, but no one was inside. Parked cars sat angled along the curb like people had stepped out for groceries and never came back. I pulled my cruiser into the center of town and shut off the engine. That's when I noticed it, the silence. It wasn't the normal quiet of a slow afternoon. It was a silence that seemed alive. Heavy, thick, as if the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. Even the wind seemed afraid to stir. I stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. My radio hissed softly at my belt, but when I tried to call in, the static cut sharp and flat, like the signal was being swallowed. I walked down the main street, scanning storefronts. A diner with menus still laid out on the tables. A hardware store with the lights buzzing faintly overhead. A gas station with a single car parked at the pump, nozzle still hanging loose like someone had dropped it mid-fill. The farther I walked, the stronger the unease grew. I kept expecting someone to step out, wave, explain it all away, but no one came. There was a sound, though. Not voices, not footsteps, just something, faint, low, almost beneath hearing. Like the hum of a refrigerator in a dark room, except it was everywhere at once. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the air was still, dead still. I ducked into the diner first. The smell hit me right away. Not rot, not decay, but something sweet, almost metallic, clinging to the air. Plates sat half-eaten on tables, silverware dropped mid-bite. Coffee cups still steamed faintly, though when I touched one, the liquid inside was cold. I called out, voice echoing back at me. "Sheriff's Department." "Anybody here?" Nothing. Not even the creak of a chair. Not the shuffle of shoes. Just my words bouncing back, thin and hollow. I backed out, unease prickling along my neck, and moved on. Each building was the same. Lives paused mid-motion. A grocery with carts left in the aisles, produce stacked neat and green. A barber shop with clippings on the floor, the chair still turned, waiting for its next customer. It wasn't abandonment. Not really. It was like the whole town had vanished in an instant. By the time I circled back toward my cruiser, sweat had soaked through my shirt. The sun hung high, but the warmth felt wrong, thin somehow, like it wasn't reaching the ground. My shadow stretched long and distorted, edges wavering as if the light itself couldn't decide where I was standing. I remember gripping the door handle of my car and freezing. There it was again, that hum. Louder now, pressing against my ears, vibrating faintly in my chest. Not mechanical, not natural, almost like voices. too many to count, layered over one another, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. I spun around, scanning the empty street. Nothing. Not a single soul. My heart hammered. I tried the radio again, but the static roared louder, bleeding into that humming until the two became one sound. I don't know how long I stood there, caught between running and staying, long enough that the shadows seemed to shift, stretching across the street, crawling like spilled ink. Finally, I forced myself back into the cruiser. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The engine turned over reluctantly, coughing once before catching. I slammed the gear into drive and pulled out of town, tires kicking up dust. The farther I got, the quieter it became again. Not normal quiet, just less wrong. By the time I reached the highway, the radio clicked back to life, dispatch's voice cutting in mid-sentence as if nothing had happened. Unit 4, status check. You there? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. Unit 4, copy. Town's clear. No disturbance found. It was a lie. And I knew it. But I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. Couldn't explain how an entire town could be full of things and empty of people. Couldn't explain the silence that wasn't silence, the shadows that moved when I wasn't looking. I drove back to the station, hands still trembling on the wheel. Never filed the report the way I should have. Just marked it routine, no incident. But that was the first time. The first patrol that showed me there are places in this world that don't fit right. Places where the rules bend and the air itself waits for you to listen. And I've never forgotten that silence. Because sometimes late at night, when I'm driving those back roads alone, I hear it again. That same hum, that same absence of life. And I know, that town is still out there, waiting. I told myself I wasn't going back. After that first patrol, I swore I'd mark it off as a fluke and bury it with the rest of the strange, unexplainable things we learn to ignore in this line of work. But some places don't let you forget. That town, it stayed with me. It was about 2 weeks later when dispatch sent me out again. Another call, same location. This time it wasn't a disturbance, just a vague complaint. Someone had seen lights moving in the abandoned houses. That's all they told me. I argued, of course. Said the place was empty, said I'd already cleared it once. But the voice on the other end was sharp. Sheriff's orders. Check it again. So I drove back, and the entire time a tight knot twisted in my gut like I knew before I even turned off the highway that things weren't right. The road was the same, long and quiet, but different somehow, as if the silence had learned something about me the last time. It wasn't just waiting this time, it was watching. When I rolled into town, everything looked just as I'd left it. Cars still lined the streets. Windows still hung open. Doors still ajar. But as I eased the cruiser down Main Street, I noticed something new. Movement. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks. A single porch swing rocked gently on the breeze outside a boarded-up house. But the air was still. Dead still. I stopped the car watching. The swing creaked back and forth, slow and deliberate, like someone had just stood and walked inside. My chest tightened. I reached for the radio, but I didn't bother. Last time it had failed me, and deep down I knew it would fail again. I stepped out, boots crunching the same gravel as before, but now it felt louder, like each step was being measured, listened to. The house with the swing sat at the corner. Its porch boards sagged with age, the paint peeling, glass long gone from the windows, and that swing kept moving. I climbed the steps, each one groaning under my weight. The air smelled thick, almost wet, as if the wood itself was rotting from the inside out. I reached out to stop the swing, pressing my hand against the chain. It was warm. I let go fast, stepping back, my heart thudding in my ears. That's when I saw them, prints in the dust coating the porch floor. Bare feet, small, maybe a child's. They trailed from the swing to the doorway and vanished into the dark house. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring into that open doorway. The shadows inside pressed outward, thick and unmoving, as if the light from outside refused to touch them. I forced myself to call out. Sheriff's Department. Anyone in there? Silence, but not empty silence. I swear I heard something shift deep inside the house. A scuff of movement, too light to be an animal. I backed away, down the steps, forcing myself to breathe. My eyes swept the street, and that's when I noticed it. Other signs. Across the road, a grocery store window wore streaks in the dust, long drag marks where fingers had trailed down the glass. In the dirt by the diner, faint footprints wove in confused circles, some overlapping, some stopping dead like the person had simply disappeared mid-step. I told myself it could all be old. Leftovers from before the town was abandoned. But no, I had walked this street before. The dust had been untouched, smooth as frost. Now it was alive with marks. Something had been here. Something still was. I swallowed hard, scanning the shadows between buildings. The air carried no sound, yet my ears strained, certain they'd catch something. A voice, a breath, anything. And then, I did hear it. Not loud, not clear. Just whispers, low, tangled, too many at once to make out. They seemed to come from nowhere, drifting across the empty street, curling into my ears like smoke. I spun, searching for the source. But the words slid away, always just out of reach, like they were spoken behind a closed door or underwater. I remember pressing my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The whispers weren't outside. They were inside. Inside my head, crawling beneath my skin, I staggered back toward the cruiser, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But before I reached it, I froze. Something new caught my eye. On the hood of my car, clear as day, a fresh handprint pressed into the dust. Large. Too large. And it hadn't been there before. My throat went dry. I hadn't taken my eyes off that car for more than a few seconds. No one could have crossed the street, touched it, and vanished in that time. But the mark was there. Fingers spread wide, palms smudging the dirt, still fresh. I whispered to myself over and over, "This isn't real. It isn't real." But the air around me thickened, heavy and buzzing, that same low hum bleeding back into my ears. I climbed into the cruiser fast, slamming the door, locking it out of instinct. My breaths came shallow, chest tight. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The whispers faded slowly, replaced by a ringing silence that felt worse than the sound. Like whatever had been circling me was still there, standing just out of sight, waiting for me to relax. I don't remember putting the car in gear. I don't remember turning around. I just remember driving, faster than before, eyes locked on the road ahead, refusing to look into the mirrors. But even as I left, even as the outlines of the town shrank in the distance, I couldn't shake it. That feeling, that certainty. The first time I'd come, the town had been empty, dead, silent. But now it wasn't. Something was moving there, walking barefoot across the dust, dragging its fingers along glass, whispering just beyond hearing. And whatever it was, it knew me. It knew I had come before, and it wanted me to come back. I didn't tell anyone when I returned to the station. Just like the first time, I kept it quiet. Wrote the report as routine. No incident. No contact. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I kept hearing the swing. That slow creak, as it moved back and forth in the still air, and beneath it, faint as breath. I swore I heard the whispers again. Not outside, not across the room, inside. And once you've heard something like that, you can't pretend silence is ever just silence again. I'd told myself I was done with that town. 2 patrols had been enough. More than enough. Each time I left, I felt like I'd barely slipped out before something reached for me. But duty doesn't care about fear. Orders don't stop just because your gut twists and your sleep is filled with whispers you can't shake. It was late October when I got sent back again. I didn't argue this time. Didn't waste breath trying to push the call on someone else. Deep down, I think I knew they wouldn't. It had to be me. Like the place had chosen me, and no one else could even see it the way I did. The drive felt heavier that night. The air was colder, and a pale fog curled along the highway, hugging the ditches and spreading low over the fields. I told myself it was normal. Season change, cooler nights. But something about the way it moved unsettled me. It didn't drift, not the way fog usually does. It slid, slow, almost deliberate. By the time I reached the turnoff to the town, the fog had thickened, coiling over the dirt road like it had been waiting for me. My headlights cut a narrow path through it, but everything outside that cone of light seemed swallowed whole. The silence was the same as before, but now it was wrapped in the fog, muffled, heavy. Even the hum of my engine felt muted, like I was driving underwater. When the town appeared out of the gray, my chest tightened. Buildings rose like dark shapes half drowned, outlines blurred, their windows glowing faint with pale light that wasn't really light at all. The water tower loomed above, just a darker shadow against the sky. I pulled onto Main Street, rolling slow, my wipers pushing damp mist off the windshield. That's when I saw them. Figures. Not clear, not solid. Shapes just beyond the reach of my headlights. Standing at the edges of the fog. At first, I thought it was my eyes. Shadows bending strange in the mist. But as I inched forward, I could feel them. Watching. I stopped the car, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. For a long moment, nothing moved. The fog shifted. My headlights cut empty air, but I swear I saw outlines. Tall, dark, human, but not. Standing at the corners, watching me without faces, I blinked, and they were gone. But the air in the car felt crowded, pressed, like they hadn't vanished. They'd only stepped closer, into the blind spots my eyes couldn't catch. I forced myself to step out. My boots hit the damp pavement with a hollow sound. The fog curled around my legs, chilling me to the bone. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and swept it across the street. Nothing. The beam caught storefronts, peeling paint, broken glass. But no figures. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. My skin prickled, every hair on my arm standing stiff as though something was brushing close without touching. I walked a few steps, the crunch of gravel muted by the fog. My voice came out hoarse when I called. "Sheriff's Department! If anyone's here, show yourself." The sound died quick, swallowed by the mist. And then a shape moved, not far, just at the edge of vision. A dark figure slipping between two buildings. Not walking, not running, just gliding like the fog itself was carrying it. My stomach turned. I shone my light that way, but there was nothing. Just fog. I told myself to leave. Get back in the car, drive out, call it in as nothing. But I didn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, as though the town itself held me there. Another shape appeared. This time to my left. Tall, still, featureless. Standing at the end of the street, I whipped my light toward it, and again, nothing. My breath fogged in front of me, too quick, too shallow. I turned in a slow circle, scanning. But the mist closed in, hiding everything beyond a few feet. That's when I heard it. Not whispers this time. Not the hum. Footsteps. Soft, measured, crunching in the gravel just behind me. I spun, flashlight beam slicing the fog, but the street was empty. No one there, but the steps didn't stop. They circled me, slow, deliberate, just out of reach of the light. My ears tracked them, moving steady, pressing closer, though I couldn't see a thing. I backed toward the cruiser, one hand on my holster, the other trembling with the flashlight. And then they stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before, pressing into my chest. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loud. I just stood there, straining to see through the gray, and in that silence something else shifted, the fog itself. It began to coil upward, swirling around me in slow spirals. And inside it, faint, darker than the mist, I saw them again. Dozens of them now. Standing still. Surrounding me. Not clear. Not solid. But there. Watching. I lifted my light, shaking, and it flickered. Once, twice, then died. The darkness swallowed me whole. For a second, I thought my heart stopped. I clawed at the flashlight, smacking it with my palm, but it was dead. And in that dark, I saw them clearer than before. Shapes etched in the fog, tall and twisted, edges shifting like smoke, faces smooth and blank. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the car door, my fingers slipping on the damp metal. I yanked it open, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. The figures didn't move, but the fog pressed closer, rolling over the hood, creeping up the windshield until the outside world vanished entirely. I sat there, gripping the wheel, frozen, My chest heaved, and every inhale felt like breathing water. The radio crackled suddenly, sharp and violent, making me jump. Static roared, then cut to a voice. But it wasn't dispatch. It was a whisper, low, layered, crawling through the speakers. It said my name, clear, slow, then silence again. I couldn't take it. I slammed the keys, engine roaring to life, headlights flaring weakly against the wall of gray. I drove, fast, tires skidding on wet gravel as I tore down the street. For a moment, I thought I saw them moving in the fog, keeping pace with me, gliding alongside the car, shapes flickering at the edges of the light. I didn't look. I couldn't. I kept my eyes locked on the narrow beam ahead until slowly, the fog began to thin. By the time I hit the highway, the mist was behind me, the road ahead clear. My radio clicked back, dispatch's voice sharp and clean, calling my unit number, but I didn't answer. Not right away. I drove for miles before I could force myself to pick up the mic, before I could steady my voice enough to say, "Unit 4, clear." That's all I said. Nothing more. Because what could I say? That the fog was alive? That shadows with no faces circled me, watching, whispering my name. They'd think I'd lost it. Maybe I had. But I know what I saw, and worse. I know they saw me too. Because even now, some nights when the fog rolls in across the fields, I catch them again. At the corner of my vision, standing still, watching, and I know the next time I go back, they won't just watch. By the time I went back again, I already knew what waited for me. Not in detail, not in shape, but in feeling. The fear had turned familiar. Not weaker, not easier, just known. Like an illness you've carried too long, it becomes part of you. That night, the air was colder than before. The town lay ahead, swallowed by gray skies and crooked shadows. This time, I didn't wander the streets. I didn't search for moving fog or swinging doors. I knew where I had to go, the oldest house in town. It sat at the far end of the main street, past the broken diner and the gas station with its dangling hose. I'd noticed it on my first patrol, but avoided it. Every instinct told me to stay away. Its roof sagged, shingles rotting, paint stripped by years of weather. The porch leaned, boards warped and dark with age. Even from a distance, it seemed wrong, like it didn't just exist in the town, but over it. And I don't know why, but this time I couldn't avoid it. Something pulled me there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe duty, maybe the whispers that never fully left my ears. I parked a little ways down and walked the rest. Each step closer, the air grew heavier, pressing into my chest. My breaths came short, shallow. The silence was deeper here, as if sound itself refused to cross the threshold of that house. The porch groaned when I stepped onto it, the sound sharp in the stillness. The door stood half open, crooked on its hinges. I pushed, and it swung slow, scraping across the warped floor. The air inside was thick, stale. It smelled faintly of dust, mildew, and something sweeter beneath it, like fruit left too long in the sun. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and what it showed made my skin crawl. It wasn't empty. The house looked lived in, not freshly, not recently, but as if the family who once called it home had only stepped out for a moment. A table sat in the center of the room, plates laid neatly, cups half full of water that had long gone cloudy. A child's toy, a small wooden car, lay abandoned near a chair. The air felt colder around it, as though the warmth of whoever last touched it had been trapped there, waiting. I moved deeper, my boots leaving faint tracks in the dust. Family photos lined the walls, but the faces were faded, smudged, almost blurred. I leaned closer, squinting, but the more I tried to make out the features, the less distinct they became, until they were only shadows shaped like people. The dread built slow in my chest. Not the sudden jolt of fear, but a deep, creeping weight, like I'd stumbled into something private, something I was never meant to see. In the kitchen, dishes still sat in the sink, crusted with what had once been food. A kettle rested on the stove, blackened by rust. A clock hung above the doorway, frozen at 2:17. I stopped there, staring at it. The hands hadn't moved in decades, but a part of me swore I heard ticking. Faint. In rhythm with my pulse. The hallway beyond stretched long and dark. My light trembled as I raised it, The beam jittering across old wallpaper peeled into curling strips. Doors lined the hall, most shut. One cracked open. I don't know why, but I went to the last door first. The one at the very end. It was heavier than I expected. The knob was cold, slick with dust. When it opened, the smell hit me harder than before. Sweet, cloying, and wrong. The room was a bedroom. Small, simple, and inside were signs of a family frozen in time. A bed neatly made, though the sheets were yellowed with age. A nightstand with a lamp still standing, its bulb shattered. A pair of shoes side by side on the floor, laces untied as if someone had slipped them off moments before bed. On the dresser sat a photo frame, the glass cracked. I picked it up, hand trembling, and there they were. A man, a woman, 2 children. But their faces had blurred into nothing. I set it down fast, my breath shaking. The air in the room pressed against me, thick and suffocating, and then I felt it. Not a sound, not a sight. A presence, like the room wasn't empty, like the family had never left. My chest tightened, a chill running up my spine. I turned fast, my flashlight beam darting across corners, across the bed, across the door. Nothing, but I knew they were there. Watching. I whispered, barely audible. "Hello!" Silence, and then soft. So soft I almost thought I imagined it. A sigh. It came from the corner, from the shadows that my light couldn't touch. I froze, every muscle locked. My throat went dry, words trapped inside. The air grew colder. My breath fogged, hanging pale in the beam. The shadows in that corner thickened, pressing outward, as if something was trying to step through. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the shoes by the bed. My hand slammed against the wall, leaving a streak in the dust. I forced myself out, down the hall, my footsteps too loud in the silence. But the house wasn't done with me. Each door I passed seemed to hum faintly, the wood vibrating under my hand as though something inside pressed against it. The cracked door at the center of the hall creaked open farther on its own, slow, deliberate. I didn't look inside. I couldn't. I kept moving until I reached the living room again. And that's when I saw it. The table, the plates. They were different. When I'd entered, the food had been crusted, spoiled, decades old. But now it looked fresh. Steam rose faint from one of the cups. The toy car was gone, my chest locked tight. I backed toward the door, hand outstretched for the knob, and then I heard it again. Not whispers, not footsteps, voices, clear, distinct, a family's chatter, laughter, chairs scraping against the floor, coming from right there around the table, but no one was there. The chairs moved, though, slow, sliding against the floor, as though unseen bodies were taking their places. I ran. I don't even remember crossing the porch. I just remember the night air hitting me, sharp and cold, and the sound of my boots pounding against gravel as I fled back to the car. When I looked over my shoulder, the door to the house stood open wide, darker than the night around it, and for just a moment I thought I saw them. A family. 4 shapes standing in the doorway, watching me go. But when I blinked, the porch was empty again. I climbed into the cruiser, slammed the locks, and drove until the town was nothing but a shadow behind me. I didn't file a report that night. I didn't tell anyone, but I can still feel that house, the weight of it, the way it held on to the people inside, refusing to let them go. And I know someday I'll be pulled back there, because once you step inside a place like that, you don't really leave. Part of you stays behind, frozen. Just like them, I've worked night shifts for most of my career, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the dark is never as quiet as people think. Out here in the miles of farmland and old highways, the night breathes. The insects hum in the grass, coyotes call from far hills, and even the air seems to move in a rhythm you start to recognize after years of listening. That's why the silence. That night unsettled me before I even knew what was wrong. I had pulled off on a dirt road around midnight, parked just off the shoulder to drink my coffee and jot down some notes. The air was thick, heavy. No crickets, no owls, no wind brushing the trees, just nothing. And then faint at first, I heard it. A bell, not the sharp clang of a cowbell or the thin jingle of metal in the breeze. This was deep, hollow, the kind of sound you'd expect from an old church steeple carried on the air from miles away. It rang once, then again. Slow, heavy tolls like something was marking time. I sat there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, my other hand frozen over the notepad. I knew every town in the county, every church, every broken-down steeple. There wasn't a bell like that anywhere within earshot. I rolled the window down and leaned out. Holding my breath, it rang again, and this time, it felt closer. I can't explain it properly. But the sound didn't just pass through the air. It settled into me, into my chest. Like the toll of it vibrated against my bones. I thought about radios picking up stray signals, how sometimes you'd catch voices whispering through static. This felt like that, only heavier. I started the engine. Not because I wanted to, but because the silence between each toll was worse than the ringing itself. The sound carried on the air like it wanted me to follow, and against all reason I found myself turning onto a narrow side road. I told myself I was investigating. That was my job. But the truth is, there was something in that bell that wouldn't let me sit still. Something that said, "Come find me." The road was old, cracked, lined with trees so thick their branches knit together overhead, turning the world into a tunnel of black. My headlights struggled against it. I drove slow, gravel crunching under my tires, trying to keep my breathing steady. The bell tolled again and again, always the same distance, always just far enough that I never seemed closer. No matter how long I drove, that's when I realized I didn't recognize the road. I'd been sheriff here long enough to know every stretch of dirt and asphalt, every shortcut and dead end. But this was nowhere. The trees were unfamiliar, too tall, too gnarled, leaning toward the road like they'd grown hungry for it. I slowed the cruiser to a crawl and checked my radio. Static, just static. I muttered something under my breath. A curse, maybe? Maybe a prayer? I can't remember. And then I heard it again. Through the night air, the bell. But this time it wasn't distant. It was right there. The sound blasted through the silence so close, it made the steering wheel tremble in my hands. I slammed the brakes and sat there, headlights sweeping over the road ahead. And that's when I saw it. The faint outline of buildings, half shrouded in trees and darkness. An old church steeple leaning at an angle, rising above crooked rooftops. A town. Only, there shouldn't have been a town, not here. Not on any map I'd ever seen. I killed the engine without realizing it, just sat there with my hand still gripping the key, staring at the impossible place ahead. The air pressed heavy on my chest, and for the first time I thought maybe I should just turn back. Pretend I'd heard nothing. But then the bell tolled again, and I swear I saw the steeple sway, like the sound itself had weight. I got out of the cruiser. My boots sank into soft dirt, and the night swallowed the sound of my door shutting. The air was damp, smelling of rot and rain, though the sky above was clear. The road sloped down into the town, narrow and uneven. The houses were old, their wood swollen and dark, roofs sagging under years of neglect. Windows reflected the moonlight like blind eyes. I stood there, hands on my belt, listening. Silence. For a long moment I wondered if I'd imagined all of it. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain had turned the silence into something else. And then, from the direction of the church, the bell tolled again. The sound rolled over me like a tide. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might be sick, but my feet moved anyway. Step by step, I walked down into that place, my breath shallow, my hand brushing the grip of my revolver, though I knew a weapon wouldn't matter against whatever this was. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. The air was colder and the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was layered, like something was holding its breath all around me. Houses lined the road, porches sagging, doors ajar. I caught myself looking for curtains to twitch, for shadows to shift. But nothing moved. I passed a storefront with letters so faded I couldn't read them. A barber shop with a cracked mirror inside, catching the light of my flashlight in a way that made it look like something pale had darted past. But no one was there. And still, the bell kept tolling. By the time I reached the steps of the church, my mouth was dry. My boots echoed on the wood as I climbed, each step groaning under my weight. The doors loomed tall, swollen with age, iron handles rusted. The bell rang again, right above me. I tilted my head back and saw the steeple. The rope that would have swung the bell hung loose, swaying in the still air. No one was up there. Nothing moved. But the bell rang anyway. I pressed my hand to the door and felt it vibrate. Not from the toll itself, but from something deeper, like the sound had burrowed into the wood, into the bones of the building. I should have left then. I should have turned, walked back to the cruiser, and never looked over my shoulder again. But instead, I pushed the door open, and the silence inside was worse than the ringing. The air inside that church had been thick, almost wet. But what unsettled me most was how quickly the silence spread back out into the streets once I left. It clung to my clothes, pressed against my ears, and made the world feel smaller than it should. I walked slow, careful. My boots scraped against the dirt road. And even that small sound felt like it was too loud, like I was disturbing something that had been asleep for too long. The houses looked worse up close. Some had boards nailed haphazardly across the windows. Others sagged open like broken mouths, paint peeled in long strips, and the wood underneath was black with rot. But what caught me weren't the ruins themselves. It was the little things. A rocking chair, perfectly upright, sitting on a porch. A lantern, clean glass, sitting on a windowsill as if it had been left there just last night. Boot prints in the dust leading up to a door, but no sign of anyone who'd made them. I stopped at the first house on the corner. The prints ended at the porch steps, clear as day. I crouched, brushing my hand across one of them, half expecting the powdery dirt to smudge under my fingers. But when I touched it, the mark crumbled, as if it had been there for years. I straightened slowly, my throat dry, and that's when I caught the sound. Footsteps. Faint, quick, coming from deeper in town. Not my own. I froze, every nerve in me lit up. My hand went to the grip of my revolver, though I didn't draw it. Instead, I just listened. The steps were steady, measured, echoing off the walls of the buildings like someone wanted me to hear them. I took a breath and followed. The road split. One path curling toward a line of shops, the other toward what looked like a row of homes. The footsteps faded into the left side, into the narrow street between the buildings. I turned that way, moving cautious, my flashlight beam cutting across cracked glass and rusted signs. A tailor's shop, a grocer, a post office, its flagpole bent nearly in half. The air smelled faintly of smoke here. Not strong, not recent, but just enough to make my stomach twist. And then, movement. I saw it plain as day. A curtain in one of the windows shifted, just a ripple, like someone had brushed past. I quickened my pace, heart thudding in my chest. The building was small, some kind of general store. Its door hung crooked, one hinge broken. The prints in the dust on the ground outside were fresher than the others I'd seen, sharper. I stepped onto the porch, wood groaning under me, and pushed the door wider with the tip of my boot. Inside was empty. The shelves sagged under the weight of years. Cans rusted through, papers yellowed and curling. But there was no one there. The curtain lay still against the window, no sign it had ever moved. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, scanning every shadow, waiting for something to step forward. Nothing did. When I turned back outside, the road behind me was empty. But I swear I felt eyes on me. I forced myself to keep walking, down past the shops, deeper into the town. Every corner I turned, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A door just easing shut. A figure slipping between two buildings. Once I even saw smoke curling from the chimney of a small house, thin and pale, only to vanish the moment I blinked. It was like the town was playing a game with me, showing me just enough to keep me moving, but never enough to let me catch it. I tried calling out once. My voice cracked in the silence, bouncing off the walls. "This is Sheriff Carter," I said, trying to sound steady. "If anyone's here, you need to make yourself known." Nothing. Only the wind stirring dust along the ground. But then the bell tolled again. Distant this time. Faint, like it had retreated back into the steeple. The sound rolled low and hollow through the streets, and for just a moment, I thought I heard something underneath it. Whispers. Not words I could make out. Not clear, but layered voices, weaving together and fading as quickly as they came. My skin prickled. I kept walking. The road sloped upward, leading toward the far edge of town where the houses grew taller, more elaborate. What might have been a wealthier section once? Fences leaned crookedly, gates swung open, and weeds had devoured the yards, and that's where I saw it. A candle, flickering in the window of a two-story house, its flame a soft orange glow against the glass. I stopped dead, staring at it. It wasn't the moon, wasn't my flashlight's reflection. It was a flame, real and steady. I moved closer, step by step, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The candle flickered once, twice, and then went out. The window went black. I hurried forward, boots crunching the gravel, but by the time I reached the porch, the glass was dark and empty. Inside, nothing stirred. That was when the wind picked up. It came out of nowhere, rushing hard enough to rattle the loose shutters and send dust swirling down the street. My hat nearly flew off and I grabbed for it, squinting through the grit in my eyes, and over the howl of the wind, I heard it again. Footsteps, dozens of them, all around me, pounding down alleys, circling the buildings, rushing through the dirt roads. My chest tightened as I turned in place, flashlight darting from side to side. But there was nothing but empty streets and the moan of the wind. Still, the steps kept going, closer now, quicker, running. I stumbled backward, my boot catching on a loose stone, nearly sending me sprawling. I raised my gun this time, finger tight on the trigger, though I didn't know what I'd aim at, even if something showed itself. The steps stopped. The silence fell again, crushing and absolute. I stood there breathing hard, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, the revolver shaking in my grip. My light swept across broken signs, leaning porches, shattered glass. Nothing else, and then from the church behind me, the bell tolled, louder than before. It shook through the town, deep and endless, and as it did, I thought I saw them, figures, standing in the shadows between the houses. Too many to count, their shapes barely more than smudges against the dark. But I knew they were there, watching. The bell fell silent, and when I blinked, the shadows were gone. But the feeling stayed, that gnawing certainty that the streets weren't empty at all, that the town was alive in its own way, breathing through every whisper, every footprint, every vanished flame. I lowered my gun slowly, my hand trembling. I should have gone back to the cruiser, should have turned around right then and there. But something in me, the same thing that had pulled me down that road, that had dragged me to the church, kept whispering, "Keep going." You haven't seen it all yet. So I did. I kept walking deeper into those empty streets, each step heavier than the last, knowing full well I was being led somewhere I might not come back from. I don't remember walking back to the church. One moment, I was staring down those crooked streets, shadows shifting at the edges of my sight, the echo of footsteps still rattling through my skull. The next, I was standing at the base of the steps, the steeple rising above me like a black spine against the night sky. The bell hadn't rung again since the last toll. The silence that followed it was worse than anything I'd felt so far. Heavy, suffocating, like the whole town was holding its breath. I climbed the steps slow, each board creaking under my weight. My hand brushed against the rail, slick with dew. My chest tightened as I pushed open the church doors. The air inside was colder than it should have been. It smelled of mildew, whetstone, and something faintly metallic. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, brushing across pews warped with rot, hymnals crumbling to dust, cobwebs thick as gauze. And then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost too faint to catch, drifting from the front of the church. I froze, the beam of my light trembling across the altar. Nothing moved. I took a step forward. Then another. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices bleeding into each other, echoing against the walls. I swept my light across the pews. Empty. Always empty. Until they weren't. It happened in a blink. 1 second, I was staring at dust and rot. The next, the pews were filled. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothes that looked decades old. Bonnets, suspenders, heavy coats. Their faces were pale, drained of color, their mouths moving in unison. I stumbled back, my heart in my throat, my light flickering over them. None of them turned to look at me. They just whispered. Their words bled together, impossible to follow. But the rhythm of it was steady, deliberate, like a prayer. Then, without warning, the whispers cut off. The silence hit hard. Every head turned in the same instant, snapping toward the altar. I followed their gaze. A man stood there, tall and gaunt, his shoulders sharp under a long black coat. His hands gripped the edges of the pulpit, knuckles white. His face was shadowed, but his mouth moved. Lips stretched too wide, words spilling out that didn't sound like any language I knew. The congregation answered him, their voices rising together, frantic now, desperate. And then the first scream tore through the air. A woman in the front row, clutching her stomach, her face twisted in agony. She collapsed forward, her body shaking. Another followed, then another, the pews erupting into chaos. People clawed at their throats, their eyes wide with terror, blood staining their lips. I stood frozen, flashlight trembling in my hand, watching the scene unravel like a nightmare projected onto the walls of the church. The man at the pulpit only raised his voice, his words cutting sharp through the screams. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt nailed to the floor. A boy no older than 10 stumbled into the aisle, his eyes wide, blood dripping from his nose. He reached out, as if for help, his gaze locking onto mine. And then, like a switch flipped, the vision broke. The pews were empty again, silent, dust-covered. The boy was gone. I gasped for breath, stumbling back until I hit the doorframe. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the flashlight. My pulse roared in my ears, but before I could get out, the bell tolled again, loud, deafening, right above me. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside me now, rattling my bones, vibrating in my teeth. The walls of the church seemed to shake with it. Dust rained from the rafters, and then came the second vision. This one didn't wait for me to adjust. It slammed into me like a wave. The church was full again, but not with worshipers. This time it was chaos. Men with axes and torches forcing their way through the doors, shouting words I couldn't make out. The congregation screamed, scrambling for the exits. The men swung their weapons, wood splintering, glass shattering. The air filled with smoke. I backed up against the wall, my chest heaving. None of them saw me. I was a ghost in their nightmare. A woman tried to run past one of the attackers. He caught her by the hair and dragged her to the ground, the butt of his axe slamming into her skull. Her scream cut off with a crack. Children cried, their voices high and piercing. Flames licked along the walls, smoke filling the rafters. The bell above rang and rang, not from a rope, but from the violence itself, as if the chaos shook it to life. The man at the pulpit still stood there, untouched, unmoving. His mouth never stopped moving. His words louder than the screams. His face stretched into something almost gleeful, and then his eyes found mine. For the first time, he saw me. Everything else froze. The smoke stopped rising. The flames froze mid-flicker. The congregation hung in place, mouths open, eyes wide. Only he moved. He leaned forward, his lips still moving, his voice drilling into my skull, though I couldn't make sense of it. My head throbbed with pressure, my vision blurring at the edges. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering, "No! No!" The vision shattered. I collapsed against the nearest pew, gasping for air, sweat cold on my skin. The church was empty again, silent, but the dread stayed. It was in me now, burrowed deep. I could still feel the weight of that man's gaze, the echo of his words clawing at the back of my skull. I forced myself to stand, every muscle trembling. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. I made my way down the aisle, each step an effort, like the air itself was trying to push me back. At the pulpit, I hesitated. The wood was blackened, charred in places, as if burned long ago. I reached out with a shaking hand, brushing my fingers across the surface. It was cold. That's when I noticed the carvings. faint, etched deep into the wood. Symbols I didn't recognize, sharp and angular, curling in patterns that made my eyes ache to follow. They looked wrong, somehow alive, shifting when I tried to focus on them. I jerked my hand back, bile rising in my throat. The bell tolled one last time, not loud this time, not violent, just a single soft chime like a final word. The sound faded into the silence, leaving me standing there trembling, the weight of the visions pressing down on me. I turned and left the church, but I knew I hadn't really left anything behind. Those echoes would follow me. No matter how far I went, it was just after midnight when the call came in. The dispatcher's voice sounded uneasy, like she wasn't sure she should even be patching it through. "Sheriff Carter, we've got a report of activity out by the Old Pine Motel." That name alone made me pause. The Old Pine had been shut down for more than 20 years. Mold, termites, and unpaid bills had killed it long before I ever wore a badge. I remember riding past it as a kid, the neon sign half dead even back then, buzzing with that sickly red glow that made the letters hard to read. For years, people used it as a landmark when giving directions. Turn left after the broken motel. That's all it was good for. No one should have been there. Activity? I asked her. Her papers shuffled nervously on the other end. Caller said they saw lights on. Thought they saw people moving in the windows. But when they got close, there wasn't anyone. They didn't stick around. I asked who the caller was. She hesitated. Finally admitted it came in anonymous. That told me two things. Whoever saw it didn't want their name tied to it, and they were spooked bad enough to call anyway. I didn't like it, but I grabbed my keys and went. The drive was long and empty. Highway cutting through fields of dead grass, the moon hiding behind clouds. My cruiser's headlights stretched thin across the road, picking up nothing but dust and the occasional sign eaten away by rust. I knew when I was getting close before I even saw the place. The air changed. Heavier somehow, thicker. As if the night itself didn't want me there. I turned off the main road onto the cracked driveway. Gravel popped under my tires, and there it was, the Old Pine Motel. Time hadn't been kind to it. The parking lot was a slab of broken concrete, weeds splitting through the cracks. The office stood lopsided, its roof sagging, windows black. The two wings of the motel stretched out in a crooked L shape, 20 rooms on each side. Doors lined up like teeth, most of them warped or hanging loose, but the lights were on, not every room. Just a few, scattered here and there. A soft yellow glow leaked out of dirty curtains, one on the far left, two in the middle, another upstairs, flickering, like they were fighting to stay alive. I slowed the cruiser to a stop. The hairs on my arms lifted as I sat there, engine ticking. This place didn't have power. The grid had been cut off years ago. I knew that for a fact, and yet the lights burned, buzzing faintly in the silence. I stepped out of the car. Gravel crunched under my boots. The air smelled of wet wood and dust, and beneath it, something sour, like meat left out too long. I scanned the lot. Empty. No cars, no movement. Just that dead building staring back at me. My hand rested on the butt of my revolver as I made my way toward the office. The glass in the door was shattered, the frame warped from years of weather. A bell sat on the counter inside, its metal dulled with rust. Cobwebs draped across the corners, and a row of old keys still hung on the wall behind. But the light above the counter was on. I tilted my head, squinting at it. The bulb buzzed weakly, casting shadows that bent wrong across the walls. A chill crept down my back. I pulled out my flashlight and turned away from the office, heading toward the row of rooms. The nearest door was shut, number 5 barely visible on the rusted plate. Its curtain glowed faintly. I raised my hand and knocked. The sound echoed hollow, too loud in the silence. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. Finally, I twisted the knob. It turned smooth, too smooth for something left untouched for decades. The door creaked open. The room smelled of rot and mildew. The carpet was blackened with water stains, the wallpaper peeling in long strips. A bed frame sagged in the corner, mattress eaten away by mold. A dresser leaned sideways, its drawers swollen shut. But the lamp on the nightstand glowed steady. Its cord dangled free, not plugged into anything. I felt my stomach knot. I stepped back and shut the door. My own breathing sounded harsh in my ears. The next room flickered. The curtain twitched, just slightly, like someone had brushed past it inside. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move closer. Room 7. Same story. The knob turned without resistance. The smell hit me before I even opened it all the way. Damp wood, something sour, and beneath it, faintly, cigarette smoke. The lamp glowed weak on the dresser. But this time, there were clothes on the bed, folded, neat, like someone had just laid them out. A shirt, jeans, boots on the floor beside it, dustless, fresh. I stepped back fast, nearly stumbling over myself. My beam darted to the corners, half expecting someone to lunge out. But the room was empty. Dead still. I backed out and shut the door, my chest tight. That's when I heard it, a TV static, faint, crackling through the quiet. I turned, scanning the row of rooms. The sound was coming from farther down, one of the upstairs windows glowing with a pale blue light. I forced myself forward, boots heavy on the cracked pavement. The stairwell groaned under my weight, every step screaming through the silence. The door to room 18 was cracked open. Blue light spilled out through the gap. The static buzzed louder, crawling into my ears. I pushed it open slow. Inside, the room was wrecked. Wallpaper clawed off in strips, floorboards warped and buckled. A TV sat in the corner, screen filled with white snow, hissing loud enough to make my teeth ache. The remote lay on the floor. The plug dangled loose. And on the bed, indentations, like someone had just been sitting there. I stood frozen, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The static filled the room, but beneath it I swore I heard something else. A voice, thin, buried deep in the noise, too faint to make out words. I took a step closer. The static rose, screaming sharp in my ears. My vision pulsed, spots of white dancing at the edges. My breath came quick and shallow. I killed the flashlight and backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. The TV cut off instantly. The silence slammed back down. I stood there in the hallway, chest heaving, sweat cold on my neck. Every door was shut tight, every curtain still. But the glow of the lights flickered on, off, on again, scattered all across the motel like a heartbeat. I knew then that I wasn't alone. I knew something in that place was awake, and it wanted me to know it. When you spend enough time in abandoned places, you start to notice the sameness of them, the way mold eats through walls, the way wallpaper curls like burnt paper. The smell, always damp, always rot, always the same, but room 6 was different. I had just finished checking the upper floor, shaken after the TV incident. My nerves were raw, my flashlight beam unsteady. I remember standing in the hallway, staring down at the rows of doors, trying to decide if I should just call it in, get backup, but I didn't. I told myself it was pride, but truthfully, it was something else. Curiosity. That sick pull that makes you look over your shoulder even when you know you shouldn't. So I went back down. Most of the rooms were wrecks, but when I reached the door with the faded number 6, something felt off. The knob was cold under my palm. Colder than the air around it. I pushed it open, expecting more rot and ruin. Instead, it was like I'd stepped backward in time. The room was untouched. Not clean, not polished, but preserved. The bedspread was still smooth, patterned with faded flowers. The curtains hung straight, no dust clinging to them. A lamp on the nightstand sat quiet and dark, but the bulb inside looked brand new. And there were things. Personal things. A suitcase by the dresser, leather worn but intact. A man's hat resting neatly on the chair. A paperback novel lying face down on the bed. A folded receipt tucked between its pages. I stood in the doorway too long, my mind trying to catch up. Every instinct screamed this wasn't right. The motel had been abandoned for decades, yet this room looked like its guest had just stepped out for a smoke. I finally stepped inside, and that's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't rot. It wasn't mildew. It was something softer, almost sweet, like perfume but faint. buried under layers of dust and age. I knew it from somewhere, but I couldn't place it. It tugged at me, the way a half-forgotten song does when you catch a single note. I found myself drawn to the suitcase. The leather creaked when I touched it, and for a moment, I thought the handle might snap, but the clasps opened smooth. Inside were clothes, a man's shirts, neatly folded, socks, a tie rolled tight. They were dated, sure, 70s, maybe 80s, but they were clean, crisp. No moth holes, no yellowing. As if someone had packed them yesterday. My stomach turned. I shut it fast, forcing my hands back to my sides. That smell again. Stronger now, though I couldn't find its source. It wrapped around me, sinking in, making my head feel thick. I moved to the nightstand. The drawer slid open without a fight. Inside was a wallet. I pulled it out. The leather soft, almost warm. The ID inside read, Thomas E. Warren, address out of state. Driver's license issued 1982. A family photo tucked behind the card stopped me cold. A man in a collared shirt, smiling stiffly. A woman beside him holding a baby. The photo was faded, but the edges weren't curled. No dust clung to it. I felt a wave of nausea rise. I set the wallet back and reached for the paperback on the bed. The receipt fluttered out when I opened it. My hand froze. It wasn't yellowed like it should have been. The ink was sharp. Dated March 17th, 1982. Gas station, 2 counties over. I stared at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. Someone had been here. Not just years ago, right before the place closed. Maybe even the last guest this motel ever saw. The air pressed down heavy on me then. That smell filled my head, sickly sweet, clinging to the back of my throat. And for the first time since I'd stepped into that place, I felt watched. I turned fast, scanning the corners. The room was empty, silent, but I couldn't shake it. The sense of someone just out of sight, holding their breath. I backed toward the door, but before I could leave, something on the dresser caught my eye. A comb. Teeth, worn down from use. Beside it, a small glass bottle. Amber liquid inside. Label faded, but still legible. Aftershave. I picked it up, almost without thinking. The cap twisted smooth like it had been opened yesterday. I lifted it to my nose. The scent was the same one filling the room. Sweet, sharp, lingering. I dropped it fast, heart hammering. The bottle clinked against the wood but didn't break. The smell swelled around me, choking, pressing, as if the whole room exhaled at once. I staggered back, hand gripping the doorframe. My flashlight beam shook across the walls, and that's when I noticed something I'd missed before. The mirror. Above the dresser, an oval mirror hung, its glass clouded. But in the reflection, the room didn't look the same. The bedspread was wrinkled, sheets pulled back. The suitcase was open wide, clothes spilling out. The lamp glowed faintly, casting a shadow that didn't match mine, and on the bed, for just a second I swore I saw someone sitting there. A man. Head bowed. Hands folded. Then he was gone. The mirror showed only me, pale and sweating, flashlight beam jittering. I couldn't breathe right. My chest felt tight, that smell clawing at my lungs. I stumbled out into the hall, pulling the door shut behind me, but the second it latched, the light under the crack flicked on, soft, golden, as if someone inside had turned on the lamp. I stood there, staring at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. Every nerve screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. That smell clung to me, even in the hallway. Sweet, sharp, unforgettable. And I knew, whoever Thomas Warren was, a part of him never left room 6. There's a kind of silence that follows you after something unsettles you. Not the natural silence of a place with no people, but the silence you carry inside yourself. The silence that makes every sound sharper, every shadow longer. That's what I carried with me after leaving room 6. I stood there in the hallway, my flashlight beam trembling across the peeling wallpaper. The light beneath the door still glowed, soft and steady, even though I hadn't touched a switch inside. I told myself not to look again. Don't open it, don't check, just move on. But the smell of that aftershave still clung to my clothes, sweet and sharp, pulling at me like invisible fingers. I forced myself down the hall. The floor creaked under my boots. boards groaning like they hadn't been stepped on in years. I counted doors as I passed, 7, 8, 9, most hanging open, revealing only darkness and dust. The air was thick, heavier than outside, as if the motel itself wanted to keep me inside. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind pushing against the walls, a low hum, almost too soft to notice. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was voices, whispers, so faint I thought they might have been my own thoughts echoing back at me. I froze, holding my breath, straining to catch them. Words slid together, impossible to separate, but there was rhythm in them, cadence, like a conversation held just beyond the edge of hearing. My skin prickled. I turned slowly, shining my light down the hall behind me. Empty, just cracked doors and peeling paint. But the voices didn't stop. They grew clearer, weaving in and out, as if whoever spoke was pacing. A man's voice, low, measured, then a woman's softer, almost a whisper within a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew the tone. Familiar. The way people talk when they're too close, when they don't want others to hear. I backed toward the wall, pressing my shoulder to it as if anchoring myself could keep me sane. "Hello?" I finally called, though my voice felt small in the heavy dark. The whispers stopped. Just like that, cut off clean, as though someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. My heart thudded loud in my ears, and I realized I was gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. Then, from farther down the hall, another door creaked open. The sound was slow, deliberate, wood dragging against warped hinges. I swung my light toward it, catching the door to room 11, sliding wider on its own. I should have turned back right then, called it in, written it off as the building settling. But I stepped forward. My boots scraped soft against the floorboards, each step matching the rhythm of my heart. The air grew colder, that sweet smell returning in faint waves, though I couldn't place it this time. Not aftershave, not perfume, something else. When I reached the door, the whispers started again, but now they were louder, right there. Inside the room, I could make out the tones more clearly, though the words slipped just beyond comprehension. A man speaking slowly, almost angrily. A woman responding, her voice soft, apologetic. Another joined in, a younger voice, hurried, like a child whispering through tears. My hand hovered at the knob, trembling. I didn't want to open it, but I had to know. The metal was freezing, biting against my palm. I pushed the door wide. The room was empty, dust thick on the carpet. Furniture covered in sheets gone gray with time. No signs of life, no movement. My light swept the corners, shaking across the stains on the walls, the cracks in the ceiling. But the voices didn't stop. They filled the room now, circling me, whispering faster, overlapping until I couldn't separate them. My ears rang with it. My skin crawled. I stumbled back into the hall, but the whispers followed. They weren't coming from one room. They were everywhere. Behind every closed door, through every cracked frame, voices spoke. Low and fast, as though the walls themselves were filled with people pressed close, murmuring secrets. I turned in a circle, flashlight beam jerking wildly. Room 8. A laugh, soft and cruel. Room 9. A sob, sharp and broken. Room 10. A whisper that seemed to curl my own name into the air. I couldn't breathe. I bolted, moving faster down the hall, past the doors, past the voices. But no matter how far I went, the whispers followed, chasing me like a tide. They rose and fell together, as if every guest who had ever stayed in that motel had gathered back in their rooms, talking all at once. And then, just as I reached the far end of the hall, they stopped. Silence, sudden, crushing. I stood there, chest heaving, light trembling in my hand. The hallway stretched out behind me, lined with quiet doors. Nothing moved. For a long time, I didn't either. Finally, I turned, forcing myself toward the stairs. My body felt heavy, legs stiff, as though the air itself wanted to keep me there. At the landing, I glanced back one last time. The hallway was dim, The doors nothing but dark outlines against the wallpaper. But I swear, for just a heartbeat, I saw them. Shapes. Figures standing in the doorways. Men, women, children. Shadows watching me from every room, and then they were gone. I don't remember going down the stairs. My mind went blank, running only on instinct. Desperate to get out of that hallway, but even after I stepped back into the lobby, that silence followed me. Heavy, waiting, and in it, I thought I heard it again. One last whisper, faint and close, curling right against my ear. You shouldn't be here. Some buildings breathe. That's the only way I can explain it. You stand in them long enough and you feel it. Walls expanding. Floors groaning, the whole place alive in some strange, invisible way. The motel was breathing around me. After the whispers in the hall, I couldn't shake the sense that I'd walked into something I wasn't supposed to. Not just an old building, not just a forgotten ruin. Something else. Something still awake. I thought about leaving. God knows I should have. But my boots carried me deeper into the lobby, past the desk with its brittle ledger and the faded carpet curling at the edges. My flashlight beam swept across the floor, and that's when I noticed it. A door, half hidden behind the reception counter. I hadn't seen it before. Low, narrow, with peeling paint and a tarnished brass handle. At first I thought it might lead to an office, but when I stepped closer I saw the frame dropped lower into the floor. A basement door, and it wasn't just shut. It was locked. The padlock was rusted, heavy but not broken. The kind you'd use if you didn't just want to keep people out. You wanted to keep something in. I crouched, shining the light over it, and that's when I heard it. The scratching. Soft at first, like a nail against wood. Then sharper, faster, until it sounded like claws raking from the other side. I froze, my chest tightening. The sound wasn't steady. It came in bursts. Scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, silence. Like whatever made it was restless. Like it was waiting. I told myself it had to be an animal. A raccoon, maybe. Something that had crawled in years ago and never found its way back out. But the more I listened, the less it sounded like an animal. It had rhythm. It had intent, and once, I swear I heard it drag. Not claws this time, but something heavier. Something that slid against the floor just beyond the wood. My mouth went dry. I should have walked away. Called the whole thing in, marked it for animal control, never looked back. But my hands didn't listen. They went to the padlock. I pulled, tugged. It didn't budge. The shank was solid, fused with rust. I leaned back on my heels, heart hammering. And then, as if the thing on the other side knew what I was doing, the scratching stopped. The silence was worse. I held my breath, waiting, my ears straining. My flashlight beam jittered across the door, the paint blistered and cracked. Then, slow, deliberate, something tapped back. 1, 2, 3 times. I stumbled to my feet, nearly dropping the light. My whole body was shaking. That wasn't an animal. That was a response. I backed toward the lobby doors, but even as I did, something kept me tethered there. Curiosity, dread, I don't know. I stood halfway across the room, staring at that basement door, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't scratch this time. It whispered, faint, muffled. The sound was pressed tight against the wood, so soft I couldn't catch the words, but I knew it was a voice. Low, dragging, like someone speaking through water. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My flashlight beam quivered across the brass handle, the lock, the peeling frame, and in that moment, I knew 2 things with bone-deep certainty. 1, whatever was in that basement wasn't supposed to be there. 2, it knew I was listening. The whispering stopped, and the scratching came back. Harder this time. Frenzied. The door shuddered under the force. Dust shaking from the frame, the whole counter vibrating against it. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the torn carpet. Then it stopped again. Just silence. My ears rang in it. Heart pounding in my throat. I don't remember how long I stood there. Seconds, minutes. My flashlight felt heavy in my hand, my badge like a weight in my chest. Finally, I forced myself to the door, put my palm flat against the wood. It was warm, Not from the building, not from age. Warm like a body pressed against the other side. I jerked my hand back fast, bile rising in my throat. That was enough. More than enough. I turned, nearly running for the exit, desperate for clean air, for distance. My boots echoed across the lobby, too loud, like the motel was mocking me with every step. But just before I reached the door, I heard it one last time. Not scratching, not tapping, a voice. Clear this time, sharp, right against the wood. Sheriff, my name without saying it, my title. The sound of it hollowed me out inside. I didn't look back. I shoved through the doors into the night, gasping, the cool air slapping my face. The motel loomed behind me, silent and still, but that warmth on my palm lingered. That whisper clung to me like smoke, and I knew, deep down, that locked basement wasn't keeping something out. It was keeping something in, and whatever it was, it knew I had heard it. I've spent most of my life trusting my eyes. As a sheriff, that's what you do. You look at a scene, you piece it together, you tell truth from lies by what you see. But that night at the motel, my eyes became the one thing I couldn't trust. I didn't go back inside right away. After the basement door, after the scratching, the whisper, I stood outside for a long time. My patrol car was parked crooked by the roadside, headlights still cutting across the cracked asphalt. I should have just gotten in, radioed it in as abandoned property, called it a night, but I didn't. Something about that place held me there, like the air itself was too heavy to leave behind. Like if I walked away, it would follow me. So I went back in. The lobby felt different the second time, heavier. The air smelled damp, like mildew mixed with something faintly metallic. The walls seemed darker, the patterns on the wallpaper curling like they were moving. My flashlight cut through the gloom, but the shadows it threw seemed too thick, too heavy, like they wanted to cling instead of scatter. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. Stress, fatigue, maybe nerves. But when you repeat something to yourself too many times, it starts to sound like a lie. I tried to focus on the job, step by step, room by room. The main hall stretched ahead, with doors lining either side. Each one had a number plate, some tilted, some missing, all coated in dust. The floor creaked under my boots as I walked. That's when I noticed the shadows didn't creak with me. I stopped, staring at the beam of light. The shape of my body stretched across the hall, long and thin, but behind me something else moved, not in sync with me. Not my shadow. It slid across the wall just out of the flashlight's reach. Slow, deliberate. I whipped the light toward it, and of course there was nothing. Just peeling paint and a blank stretch of plaster. I told myself again I was tired, that my brain was filling in the blanks. But then it happened again. A ripple in the corner of my vision, a darker patch within the dark. It leaned forward across the doorframe like it was peeking out at me. My throat went dry. "Hello?" I muttered, my voice cracking in the silence. "Anyone there?" Nothing. The beam shook in my hand as I swept it along the walls across the ceiling. And that's when I realized something else. My shadow was wrong. It didn't fall the way it should have. My flashlight was angled down, but the outline of my body stretched sideways, bending along the hall like something was tugging at it. I blinked hard, took a step back. The shadow stayed. It wasn't mine anymore. It was taller, thinner, arms too long. Head tilted at an angle no human could hold. I felt my stomach clench. I staggered back, nearly tripping, the beam swinging wildly. The thing didn't vanish. It peeled itself from the floor, detaching from the wall like wet paper tearing loose. And then it stood, not flesh, not bone. Just a figure made of absence. Blacker than the dark around it, like the light itself refused to touch it. It didn't move toward me. It didn't have to. Because even standing still, it felt like it was closer. I could feel it, the weight of it pressing on me, pulling at me. Like if I looked at it too long, it would swallow me whole. I turned and ran. The hall seemed endless, door after door whipping past me. My boots pounded the warped floorboards, my breath ragged in my chest. The flashlight beam jittered ahead, but no matter how far I ran, the shadows ran with me. They stretched across the walls, slipping from door frames, spilling from cracks in the ceiling. Shapes without bodies, sliding just at the edge of sight. Whispers rose around me, faint at first, then louder. Not words, just the suggestion of voices. Hundreds of them, all bleeding into each other. I shoved past the lobby, heading for the exit, but when I reached the doors, I stopped dead. Because the glass was black. Not tinted. Not shattered. Just black. Like the night outside had been erased. Like there was nothing beyond it anymore. I stood there, shaking, every nerve screaming at me to push through. But when I pressed my hand against the glass, it was cold. Solid. Behind me, the whispers grew louder. I turned, and the shadows were closer. Figures now. Dozens of them. Leaning from the walls, crawling from the floor. Shapes with no faces but eyes I could feel. Every single one staring at me. I bolted for the stairwell instead. My boots slammed against the steps as I climbed, two at a time, my lungs burning. The voices followed, echoing up the stairwell, rising in pitch, blending into a sound like wind through broken teeth. I burst onto the second floor, stumbling into a long corridor. The wallpaper here was worse, curling in strips, black mold spreading like veins. The doors hung open, some ripped from their hinges, and in every room, the shadows moved, not with me. Without me. They stood at the edges of the beds, leaned against the windows, crouched in the corners. Shapes that shifted when I blinked. Wrong angles bending where joints should have been. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, sweat freezing down my spine. One of them broke from the wall. It slid toward me, silent, its limbs stretching too far. My flashlight hit it straight on, but the beam bent around it like the light itself was afraid. I did the only thing left. I ran again. I don't know how I found the stairwell, or how I made it back to the lobby. All I remember is the pounding of my boots, the shadows chasing, the voices bleeding into my skull until I couldn't tell if they were outside or inside my head. And then, suddenly, the door was there, wide open, not black anymore. Not sealed, just open. I didn't stop to think. I didn't question. I just hurled myself through it. The night air hit me like a wave, sharp and cold. My legs nearly gave out as I stumbled toward the patrol car, fumbling for the handle, dragging myself inside. I locked the doors, sat there gasping, staring at the motel through the windshield. It was quiet again. Still, no whispers, no movement, but the windows were wrong. Every pane of glass was dark. And in each one, I thought I saw a shape. Dozens of them, watching. I didn't stay. Didn't look again. I started the engine, tires screaming against the asphalt as I pulled away. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they cramped, my heart still slamming against my ribs. But even as the motel faded in the rearview mirror, the shadows didn't leave me, because every streetlight I passed threw them across the road, and some of them didn't move when I did. I've never trusted my eyes since that night. Not fully, because now I know what I saw. And worse, I know it saw me back. I've told myself more times than I can count that I should have left it alone. That it wasn't my responsibility, that I could have just closed the file and moved on. But that night, I didn't. And it's the one decision that's haunted me ever since. It started with a call I never should have taken. The dispatch record said it came in just past midnight. A woman's voice, shaky but clear, reported that her brother had gone missing. He'd been driving through a town she swore still showed up on old maps, but had long since vanished from the new ones. She said he'd sent her his location before his phone went dead. And when she read it off, I felt a cold prickle run up my arms. The coordinates landed in a stretch of county I knew all too well. Dead roads, old mining towns, places where houses leaned on themselves like drunks waiting to fall. Most of them had been empty for decades, left to rot in the dust. But I also knew something else. I wasn't the first to get that call. Sheriff Whitaker had gone out there 2 weeks earlier, following up on a nearly identical report. He never came back. Officially, it went down as a disappearance on duty, but off the record, nobody wanted to talk about it. Deputies looked away when his name came up. Dispatchers shifted in their chairs. Everyone knew, but no one would say it. So when I heard the woman's voice, when I heard that fear and desperation, I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my jacket, signed out the cruiser, and headed toward the dark stretch of county no one else wanted to touch. The drive was long and empty. The road wound through fields of brittle grass, past barns with collapsed roofs and signs so faded you couldn't read them anymore. The moon sat low and pale, smudged by thin clouds, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle in the dash. I kept thinking about Whitaker. He was older than me, heavier around the middle, but steady, reliable. The kind of man who didn't scare easy. If something had happened to him out here, what chance did I have? I gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving. The GPS guided me down a narrow road I'd never seen before. The asphalt was broken, weeds pushing through the cracks. After a few miles, the lines vanished, the edges of the road blurring into dirt and gravel. And then the town appeared. It rose out of the dark like something half-remembered. A handful of buildings lined a main street, their wooden frames sagging, windows shattered, paint long since stripped by wind and sun. A faded sign at the edge leaned sideways, its letters too weathered to read. I slowed the cruiser, headlights sweeping across storefronts and porches, each one empty, hollow. The silence was thick, heavier than the usual quiet of a dead town. It was the kind that pressed in, like the world itself was holding its breath. I parked in front of what might have been a general store, killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment. My hand hovered over the radio mic, but I didn't pick it up. Some part of me already knew the signal wouldn't carry. I stepped out, boots crunching against gravel. The air was colder here, sharp enough to sting my nose. The smell was faint, but strange, like old dust mixed with something sweet and rotten underneath. I clicked on my flashlight and started walking. The beam cut across warped planks and rusted signs. Chairs sat overturned in front of a boarded cafe. A rusted tricycle leaned against the steps of a house. Everything looked frozen, like the town had been abandoned in a single breath. And yet, there were signs of life, footprints in the dirt, fresh enough to catch the light. A jacket draped over a porch railing, the faintest hint of smoke curling up from a chimney, gone before I could blink. My gut twisted. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. I followed the prints. They led me down the street, past a bar with its door hanging open, past a church with its steeple cracked in two. Each step echoed too loud, like the ground was empty underneath. I kept waiting to hear something else, a dog bark, a door creak, even the wind, but nothing came. Only silence. The prints ended in front of a motel. The sign was shattered, the letters unreadable, but the outline was still clear enough. The front doors hung half open, swaying gently, though no breeze touched them. My light caught the reception desk, the cracked bell still sitting on the counter. A guest book lay open, its pages yellowed and curling. I stepped inside, the floor groaning under my weight. That's when I saw it, a sheriff's badge, lying face up on the counter. I froze. It was old, scratched, dulled by time. But I knew the name etched into it. Whitaker. My throat tightened as I reached for it. The metal was cold, colder than the air around me. He had been here. I slipped the badge into my pocket and kept moving. The hallway behind the desk stretched long and narrow, lined with doors. Most hung open, revealing rooms stripped bare, just frames of beds, curtains eaten by moths, wallpaper peeling in sheets. But one door stood closed. Room 3. The number plate was crooked, the wood around the knob splintered like it had been forced before. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mold. Something older, something I couldn't place. A sweetness mixed with rust, clinging to the back of my throat. Inside, the room was different. The bed was made, the covers smooth. A suitcase sat by the dresser, clothes folded neatly inside. On the nightstand, a watch ticked softly, though the hands never moved. I felt the hair on my arms rise. This wasn't abandoned. This was waiting. I backed out, heart pounding, and nearly dropped the flashlight, because the hallway was darker now. The light seemed swallowed, dimmer with each step I took. The open doors no longer revealed empty rooms. They showed shadows shifting inside, shapes leaning forward, Too tall, too thin? I blinked, shook my head, told myself it wasn't real, but the whisper came next. Faint, low, my name. I spun, but the hall was empty. The sound didn't come again, but the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. My hands were slick on the flashlight, the metal shaking against my grip. I forced myself back to the lobby, to the open door. The night outside looked different, darker, like the sky had sunk closer. I stepped out, pulling in lungfuls of the cold air, trying to steady myself. My cruiser was still there, headlights off, but I swear for a moment I saw a figure standing beside it. Tall, motionless. When I blinked, it was gone. I walked faster, almost running, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, started the engine. The headlights cut across the street, lighting up the town one last time. Every window was filled with faces, not clear, not solid, just impressions. Shadows pressed against glass, eyes hollow, mouths open like they were mid-scream. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel, and tore back down the road without looking back again. Whitaker's badge was heavy in my pocket, and the whole way back, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe he hadn't vanished. Maybe he'd just become part of the town. I should have gone home that night. I should have taken Whitaker's badge as a warning, filed the report, and left that place to rot. But something about it wouldn't let me go. The next evening, I found myself back on the same cracked road, headlights carving through the dark. My chest was tight, my stomach sour, but I kept driving deeper, as if the town itself had me on a hook I couldn't break free from. The first thing I noticed were the vehicles. Not one or two, dozens. They started showing up just outside the edges of the old town, lined along the shoulder of the road, then spilling into the lanes themselves. Pickup trucks with their doors hanging open, sedans left at angles as if someone had swerved and stopped short. Some still had headlights faintly glowing, though the batteries should have been dead decades ago. It was like time had hit a pause button. One truck sat in the middle of the road with a ladder balanced in the bed. Paint cans tipped over, but still full. A sedan was parked half across the yellow line with the driver's door wide open and a purse dumped across the seat. Lipstick and coins scattered on the floor. Another car had groceries in the back seat, milk long since curdled into stone, bread mummified in its bag. What made my skin crawl wasn't just the way they were abandoned, it was the fact they all looked like people had simply vanished, mid-action, mid-thought. Keys were still in ignitions. Radios were still tuned to dead stations, a faint hiss of static when I leaned close. One glove box was open with a map sticking out, a pen mark circling the very town I was standing in, and yet there wasn't a single sign of a struggle. No broken glass, no blood. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the road with my flashlight sweeping across the rows of silent machines, and I felt like I was walking through a graveyard. Only this graveyard wasn't for people. It was for moments, all these little slices of life cut short and left behind, preserved in rust and dust. The silence was unbearable. I tried to tell myself it was just an old highway accident, some forgotten evacuation, maybe even a ghost story locals told to keep kids from wandering out this way. But none of that explained what I saw next. One of the cars, a pale blue Buick, still had a cassette playing. The tape inside must have been running on a loop for years. The music was faint, warped, like a voice singing underwater. But the part that made my hands go cold was the fact the tape player clicked when the song ended, and then started again. That machine was still alive, and if it was alive, maybe the town was too. I pushed deeper in. The further I went, the more the road closed in with vehicles. Some were angled like they'd stopped suddenly. Brakes slammed hard. Others were neatly parked along the curb as if their drivers had left for just a minute, expecting to come back. A bicycle lay in the street, with its front wheel still spinning lazily when my light passed over it. Though there was no wind, no reason for it to move at all, I crouched beside a rusting Ford and shined my light into the back seat. A child's backpack sat open, coloring books half-finished inside. A stuffed bear leaned against the window, one button eye missing, its fur stiff with age. For a second, I swore I could smell crayons. That's when I realized something that made my heart stutter. The dust. There should have been years of it. Thick coats covering everything, inside and out. But some of these vehicles weren't coated at all. Some looked freshly used, like someone had stepped out only hours before. The glass was clean. The paint, though faded, gleamed faintly in my beam. I backed away fast, my boots crunching against gravel, my breath loud in the stillness. That's when I heard it. A car door closing. Not behind me. Not far off. Close. I spun, the flashlight beam jerking across hoods and windshields, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement inside one of the trucks. A shadow leaning forward, then pulling back. But when I stepped closer, the seat was empty. The door was locked. My reflection stared back at me through cracked glass, pale and wide-eyed. I told myself I was imagining it, that my nerves were playing tricks. But the sound had been real. I wasn't alone out there. I tried the radio in my cruiser, but just like before, it was nothing but static. Not even the faint comfort of dispatch on the other end. So I kept walking, telling myself I'd just check a little further. Just enough to ease the gnawing in my gut. The road bent slightly. And that's when I saw the bus. It sat sideways, blocking nearly the whole street, its yellow paint dulled to the color of bone. The doors hung open, and when I climbed the steps, the smell hit me. Mildew, old leather, and something metallic underneath. Seats were torn. Windows shattered. But what froze me wasn't the decay. It was the fact that school books were still scattered across the aisle. Lunchboxes lay unopened. Jackets hung from hooks, small and faded, and in the very back, pressed into the dust of the last row, were handprints. Dozens of them. Small, smeared, overlapping. I stood there staring until I felt my throat close. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied again. The silence pressed harder, thick and suffocating, until I thought I'd choke on it. I stumbled back down the steps, my boots too loud against the metal. And when I hit the street again, I swore every car was facing me. Headlights dark, but aimed straight at where I stood, like a crowd watching. I don't remember running, but somehow I was back at my cruiser, keys shaking in my hand. I fired up the engine, headlights cutting through the endless rows of vehicles, and I couldn't help the thought that hit me then. What if all these people hadn't just vanished? What if they were still here? Not gone, not dead, just waiting. Waiting for someone else to join them. I drove out fast, tires screaming against cracked asphalt, but even as the town shrank in my rear view, the silence followed me. It didn't matter how far I went, because I knew I wasn't carrying just Whitaker's badge anymore. I was carrying their absence, and absence weighs more than anyone tells you. I remember the first time I heard it, that sound. It was midnight, though I hadn't planned on being awake. I'd been staying at the edge of the town for a few nights, using an old sheriff's station as my base while I followed the trail of the one who went missing before me. The building creaked with every gust of wind, its walls thin enough that the night air seemed to breathe through them. I had dozed off in the chair behind the desk, my hat pulled low over my eyes when the silence broke. At first I thought it was the wind, a sharp cry that rose and fell like air moving through a canyon. But then it happened again, louder, sharper, and it wasn't the wind. It was a scream that tore through the night like a blade, dragging me awake, setting my chest tight. It came from the forest that borders the town, the thick wall of black trees that seemed to press against the streets, waiting, hiding whatever lay beyond. I sat there in the chair, frozen for a moment, listening. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I had been a sheriff long enough to know what panic sounded like, and there was no mistaking it. That scream wasn't playful. It wasn't a drunk yelling. It was someone in terror. I stood, grabbed my flashlight and radio, though I already knew the radio would be useless. The signals never carried out here. Still, habit had me clipping it on. My boots echoed down the wooden steps as I pushed out into the street, where the air hung cold and heavy. The forest loomed at the far end of the road, past the row of shuttered storefronts. Everything was still. No dogs barked. No insects buzzed. Just that silence. Until the scream came again. This time it sounded closer. My body reacted before my mind caught up. I moved fast, past rusting vehicles and cracked sidewalks, heading toward the tree line. The beam of my flashlight trembled across storefronts, catching glass windows and peeling paint. For a second, I swore I saw movement in one of the shops, a shadow quick as a blink. But when I stopped to look closer, there was nothing but empty shelves and dust behind the glass. I swallowed hard and kept moving. The forest edge rose up in front of me, black and impenetrable. My light barely cut past the first row of trunks. I hesitated there, listening, my hand resting on the grip of my sidearm. It was quiet again. Too quiet. The scream had stopped. I thought about turning back, about writing it off as imagination or a coyote or something else. But then I remembered the sheriff who'd vanished before me, the man I was here to find, and the missing people whose names were tied to this place long before either of us arrived. If one of them was out there screaming for help, could I really turn back? So I stepped into the trees. The forest swallowed me whole. The light from my flashlight bounced weakly between trunks, carving out narrow tunnels of visibility. The ground was soft, covered in thick layers of fallen leaves that muffled my footsteps, though every sound I made still seemed to echo unnaturally, like the trees were repeating it back. I moved slowly, pausing every few steps to listen. My breath steamed in the cold. I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then it came again. The scream, this time from deeper in the woods, farther than it had sounded before. I froze, realizing something strange. The scream was the same as before. The same pitch, the same length, almost identical. I tried to tell myself I was wrong, but deep down I knew. It hadn't changed at all. Still, I pushed deeper. Branches clawed at my jacket and the ground sloped unevenly, forcing me to catch myself against damp bark. The air grew colder. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. And then, after several long minutes, the scream rose again. But it wasn't farther away. It was closer, much closer. My heart slammed against my ribs as I swung the light wildly, cutting across trees, brush, shadows. My throat went dry. The scream had come from just ahead, but when the light caught the clearing before me, it was empty. No one was there. I stood in the clearing trying to breathe, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire burned. I thought I saw shapes between the trees, figures, faint, moving just out of range. But when I aimed the beam directly, there was nothing, only darkness. Then the scream ripped through the forest again, but this time it wasn't ahead of me, it was behind me. I spun around, almost dropping the flashlight, and my back hit the trunk of a tree. My chest heaved as I swept the light across the trail I'd come from. Empty, nothing, just black trees stretching forever, but something wasn't right. I realized, with a slow, sick dread, that I couldn't see the path back to town anymore. The trees seemed closer. The trail had vanished, I whispered to myself, cursing under my breath, trying to steady my breathing. I took a step forward, then another, aiming the light back and forth. Everything looked the same. Identical trunks, identical shadows, and then the scream came again. But this time, it wasn't a scream. It was laughter, thin, high, sharp. The same voice, but twisted. What had once been pain now carried a sick joy. I staggered backward, my legs shaking, my breath quick and shallow. My flashlight flickered again, the beam dimming for a heartbeat before it came back. I swear in that flicker I saw them. Dozens of faces staring from between the trees. Hollow eyes, mouths wide open, frozen in the act of screaming, and then they were gone. I ran. I don't even remember choosing a direction. My boots tore through leaves and mud, branches ripping across my arms, my jacket. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. And then, suddenly, I was back at the edge of town. The forest spat me out onto cracked pavement, and I fell to my knees, gasping, clawing for air. My flashlight beam danced across the abandoned buildings, familiar again, safe in their silence. I turned to look back at the woods, but they were still. Black, ordinary, no screams, no laughter, nothing. I stayed there for a long time, sitting in the street trying to convince myself it had been my mind playing tricks. The woods can do that to a man, especially at night. But deep down, I knew what I had heard. The screams, the laughter, the faces. They were real, and they were waiting for me to come back. I've walked through storms before. I've driven in whiteout blizzards where the road disappears and you feel like you're floating in nothing. But that night, when the fog rolled into town, it wasn't like any weather I'd ever seen. It began slow, drifting in from the woods, curling down the empty streets like smoke creeping under a door. By the time I noticed it, it was already too thick to ignore. The lamps along Main Street gave off weak halos, swallowed before they reached more than a few feet. My flashlight was useless beyond a small circle. At first I told myself it was normal, a cold night, the forest breathing its mist out into the streets. But something about it felt wrong. The fog was heavy, dense, like it had weight to it. I remember the way it carried sound, or maybe the way it killed sound. My own footsteps didn't echo anymore. The world was muffled, smothered, like a blanket had been thrown over everything. I kept moving because standing still in it was worse. My boots tapped against the cracked asphalt as I walked down the middle of the road, my hand tight on the flashlight. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that fog can play tricks on a man's mind. You start to imagine movement, shapes in the distance, even when nothing's there. But then I saw one, just beyond the edge of the light. A figure stood in the middle of the street, still, watching. My heart climbed into my throat. I froze, trying to make sense of it. The fog swirled, distorting the outline, stretching it tall 1 second, short the next. I raised the beam to it, and in that instant, it vanished. Gone. Like it had never been there. I muttered under my breath, forcing myself forward. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick, but I didn't believe my own words. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. Time seemed to slide. I'd walk for what felt like 10 minutes and then look back, only to see the sheriff's station still faintly behind me, like I hadn't gone anywhere at all. Other times, I'd turn and find nothing but more fog, the world erased behind me, and always, in the corners of my vision, the shapes. They were never clear, never fully formed, sometimes tall, sometimes hunched, sometimes only the impression of a body fading before I could focus. At first, they seemed far away, but slowly they began to appear closer, always just beyond reach. The worst was the sound. At some point, I don't know when, I realized I wasn't alone in that fog. The silence broke faint at first. The sound of footsteps, not mine. Slow, steady, measured. They matched my pace, always keeping their distance. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved again, they followed. I spun around more times than I can count, sweeping the flashlight wildly through the fog, my breath ragged, sweat cold down my back. Each time, nothing. Just pale gray air, thick enough to choke on. I started talking out loud. Not shouting, just muttering to myself. Anything to break the silence. My own voice sounded strange in that place. Hollow, like it wasn't really mine. And then I heard something else. A whisper. Not words, exactly. More like the sound of a voice too soft to understand, carried on the fog itself. It was close. So close it felt like it brushed against my ear. I spun, lashing the light across the street, but there was no one. My hands trembled. My knees wanted to buckle. I remember saying out loud, "You're not real. You're not real." But what if they were? The fog thickened until I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. It pressed against me, damp and cold, sticking to my clothes, clinging to my skin. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I staggered forward, telling myself to find shelter, to find something solid to hold on to. That's when I saw them. 3 shapes, side by side, standing in the middle of the road. They were vague, blurred by the fog, but they didn't move. They just stood there, waiting. My light hit them, but it was like the beam passed through, refusing to reveal what they were. I stopped dead, heart hammering, sweat dripping into my eyes. My hand hovered near my holster, though some part of me knew a gun wouldn't do a damn thing here. I took 1 step back, and in perfect unison, all 3 shapes took 1 step forward. My breath caught in my throat. I whispered, "No!" and stumbled backward, faster now, the light bouncing wildly. The shapes kept pace, always just at the edge of vision. Never closer, never farther. Just there. The fog thickened until it felt alive, swirling around me, tugging at me. I could hear the footsteps again, more of them now, too many to count, surrounding me. Closing in. I broke. I ran. I don't know which way I went. My boots pounded against pavement, against dirt, against gravel. My lungs screamed. My flashlight beam darted across emptiness, catching nothing but the endless wall of white. And always, always I could feel them behind me. Not chasing, not rushing, just moving, steady, relentless. The whispers grew louder. Still not words I could understand, but voices, hundreds of them, wrapping around me, inside my head, pressing into me until I wanted to tear my ears off. I screamed into the fog, a raw, desperate sound, begging it to stop. But the voices only swelled, rising like a tide. I stumbled and fell to my knees, my palms scraping against the road. My flashlight rolled out of reach, its beam pointing into the mist. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stared into that fog, watching, waiting. Shapes began to form in the beam. Not vague now, clearer. Faces. Pale, hollow-eyed, mouths moving without sound. Dozens of them, all peering at me through the gray. I crawled backward on hands and knees, choking on fear, whispering, "No! No! No!" My hand fumbled for the flashlight, clutching it like a lifeline. The beam flickered once, twice, and then, just like that, the fog broke. It rolled away as quickly as it had come, unraveling into thin threads, dissolving into the night air. And suddenly I was alone again, standing in the middle of Main Street under the faint glow of the street lamps. The silence was back, but it wasn't comforting. It was worse, because now I knew what that silence could hide. I stayed there a long time, my legs weak, my body trembling. My flashlight still shook in my hand, the sweat cooling on my skin. I told myself again and again that it wasn't real, that it was the fog, that it was my mind breaking under the weight of this place. But then I thought of the way those shapes had moved, the way they mirrored me, the way the voices had risen like a chorus. That wasn't in my head, that was something real, and the worst part, the part that's never left me, was the feeling I had when the fog pulled back. The feeling that those shapes didn't retreat with it, they stayed. They're still here, just waiting for the fog to return. The first time I walked into the town square, it felt like stepping into a place that had been waiting for me. The streets leading into it were already strange enough. Empty storefronts with sun-bleached signs, windows clouded with dust, curtains left half open like someone had just stepped out for a moment and never came back. But when I reached the square, the silence pressed down heavier than anywhere else. It wasn't the kind of silence you get late at night on back roads. This was deeper. It had weight. My boots scuffed against the brick, and the sound seemed swallowed before it could travel. No echo, no birds, not even the wind through the trees. The square itself was wide and open, framed by old buildings, what must have been the town hall on one end, a shuttered diner on the other. I remember noticing the paint peeling in sheets, curling like dead skin. The benches scattered around were cracked, warped from the sun. Everything sat there, still, waiting. And in the very center of it all was the well. It was old stone, rough and crumbling in places. The mortar between the blocks cracked and faded. The wood frame over it leaned to one side, and the rope was long gone. I walked up to it slow, my hand brushing the rim. The stone was dry, too dry. I leaned over, shining my flashlight down into the darkness, and what I saw stuck with me. Nothing. Not even dampness clinging to the walls. Just a hollow throat of stone disappearing into black. My light seemed to vanish only a few feet down, like the dark itself was too thick to pierce. I pulled back quick, the taste of dust heavy in my mouth. Something about that well made my skin crawl. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong there, or maybe like the whole town had been built around it. I tried to shake it off, but the longer I stood in that square, the more the unease grew. The buildings leaned in, shadows stretched across the bricks, and the air had that strange, waiting quality. Like if I stood there long enough, something would happen, something I didn't want to see. My boots carried me around the edges of the square. I looked in windows, peered through doors left ajar. Nothing. No people, no movement, just faint traces that someone had been here once. A cracked mug left on a windowsill. A pair of shoes sitting neatly by a door. a faded flyer pinned to a post about a summer festival that must have been decades ago. All of it felt staged, left behind on purpose, like whoever lived here wanted me to find it this way. I circled back toward the well without meaning to. My eyes kept pulling toward it, toward the dark mouth in the center of the square. I stood there again, hands braced on the stone, staring down. This time I swore I heard something. It wasn't clear, not words, not even a sound I could name. Just a faint suggestion of movement below, a whisper of air that carried up from the dark. It brushed against my face, colder than the night around me, and for a second I thought I smelled something rotten. I jerked back, heart thudding, scanning the empty square. Nothing moved. The doors stayed shut. The benches stayed empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I forced myself to keep walking, to break that pull the well had on me. My footsteps carried me toward the diner. The glass door was cracked. The word open faded nearly white. I pushed it, and it gave a low groan before swinging inward. Inside was dust. Nothing but dust. A few stools at the counter, vinyl split and leaking foam. A menu board with letters missing. I shined the flashlight over everything, trying to find some clue, some sign of life. But there was nothing. Just the kind of emptiness that settles in after decades without a soul. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling the place wasn't dead. More like it was holding its breath. I left quick, the silence clinging to me like cobwebs. Out in the square again, the air felt heavier. I glanced around, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw movement by the far corner. Someone slipping between the buildings. I raised my light, but the fog of dust and dark only showed empty space. I tried to steady my breathing. "You're tired," I told myself. "You're spooking yourself." But the longer I lingered in that square, the more it pressed into me. The shadows from the lampposts bent wrong, stretching toward the well no matter where I stood. My eyes kept catching motion at the edge of vision, gone the moment I looked, and always. That damn well in the center. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. Something kept me tethered there, like unfinished business. I walked up to it one last time, leaning over the cracked stone rim. My flashlight cut down into the dark, useless as before. I whispered into it, though I don't know why. Maybe just to hear my own voice in that silence. Hello? Nothing. Just the hollow dark. I waited, breath held, listening. And then, I swear it, the faintest sound drifted up, not an echo of my own voice. Not air moving, something else. A sound too soft to place, but too strange to mistake for nothing. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the uneven bricks. My chest was tight, my skin cold despite the still night air. I looked around me, scanning the buildings, the benches, the doorways. Empty. Always empty. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. That square wasn't abandoned. It was watching, and whatever lived in that well, it wasn't finished with me yet. I couldn't sleep that night, even back at the station. The quiet of the town square clung to me like a damp coat I couldn't peel off. I laid on the narrow cot in the back room, boots still on, staring at the ceiling and listening for anything to cut through the silence. But silence was all I got. Heavy, pressing, the kind that crawled inside your chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the well, its cracked stone rim, the way the shadows seemed to bend toward it, the hollow blackness that swallowed my flashlight beam whole, and worse than all of that, I remembered the sound, that faint breath of noise drifting up, just enough to make me doubt myself. It was around 2 in the morning when I finally gave up. Sleep wasn't coming. I poured a cup of stale coffee, the kind that tastes like cardboard and ash, and stepped outside for air. The night was cool, the sky dark and heavy, no stars. My boots carried me back down the street without me even thinking, toward the square, toward the well. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. The buildings leaned darker, their windows nothing but black holes. The brick streets looked cracked, crooked, as if they'd shifted in my absence. And the silence, God, the silence, grew thicker with every step. By the time I reached the square, I was shaking inside. I told myself it was just nerves, just lack of sleep. But the truth was, I already knew something was waiting for me, and I wasn't wrong. The well stood there in the middle, the same as before, stone rim jagged under the moonlight. I stepped closer, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounding far too loud. My flashlight trembled as I lifted it over the mouth of the well, shining into the black. I don't know what I expected. Nothing, maybe. Just the same hollow dark, but instead I heard it. Faint, far below, a voice. At first I thought it was the wind shifting through stone, but the air was still, not even a breeze. I held my breath, leaned closer. The sound rose again. Clearer this time, a whisper, my name. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the light. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I swung the beam across the square, scanning the doorways, the benches, the broken windows. Empty. All of it. But then, again, my name. Drifting up from the dark throat of the well. This time, it wasn't alone. There were others, fainter, layered. Dozens of voices, all whispering at once, tangled together like dry leaves in the wind. Some called my name, stretching it long, almost playful. Others just murmured nonsense, words too soft to catch but sharp enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. My legs locked, my ears straining for every sound. And then, beneath all of them, one voice cut sharper. Louder! Help! It was a woman's voice. Weak, broken, like someone calling from miles away. I felt it in my bones. That wasn't an echo. It wasn't a trick. There was something down there. I forced myself to the rim, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I leaned just enough to peer down, flashlight gripped in both hands. The light vanished into black again, swallowed whole. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. But the voices didn't stop. They circled around me, rising and falling, always slipping just out of clarity. My name, whispered over and over. That word, help, thrown up like a hook. I couldn't tell if it was pleading, mocking, or both. The longer I listened, the more wrong it felt. The cadence wasn't natural. Too sharp in places, too drawn out in others. Like someone who had heard a human voice once and was trying to copy it. I backed away, boots scraping brick. The voices followed, not louder, not closer, but steady. As if the dark throat of the well stretched with me, never letting me out of earshot. I pressed my palms to my ears. My breath came fast and shallow. But it didn't help. The whispers crawled inside anyway, slipping straight through my skull. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been minutes. Could have been an hour. Time felt broken. The square blurred around me until it was just me, the well, and the voices. Then, as sudden as it started, they stopped. The silence fell heavy, heavier than before, and that was somehow worse. I stared at the well, the stone rim glowing pale in the moonlight. My hand lifted on its own as if something inside me wanted to climb down, to see, to answer. But I didn't. I couldn't. I turned and stumbled back across the square, my legs weak, my chest tight. I didn't stop until I reached the street, the well shrinking behind me. Even then, I felt it. Watching, listening, and though the whispers had gone quiet, I carried them with me. Back at the station, I locked the door. Sat at the desk with my head in my hands, my coffee gone cold. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, the emptiness of the town playing tricks on me, but the truth wouldn't leave. I had heard them, voices, calling me by name, and deep down, beneath the fear, there was something worse. A pull. A part of me that wanted to go back, that wanted to lean into the dark, listen closer, and answer. I kept telling myself I wouldn't go back to the square. After that night with the whispers, I swore I'd avoid the well. I thought if I stayed away, the voices would fade, and maybe I could convince myself it had all been in my head. Just stress. Just the mind playing tricks in an empty place. But some things don't let go that easy. The more I tried to ignore it, the more I felt the pull. Every hour I sat at my desk or walked the empty streets, my mind drifted back to that dark circle of stone. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a weight pressing down on me. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. The moon was high, the air damp and cool when I found myself standing in the square again. My boots scraped against broken brick, my breath fogging faintly in front of me. Everything looked the same. The leaning buildings, the benches eaten with rust, the well waiting in the center like it had been expecting me. I told myself I was just going to check it. Shine my light down, see the dry stone, prove to myself that nothing was there. But when I leaned over the rim this time, it wasn't dry. There was water. A shallow pool, maybe a few feet down. The beam of my flashlight cut across it, catching the surface. It should have been simple. Just black water, still and silent. But it wasn't. The surface rippled, slow and unnatural, though no wind stirred the air. My light shifted, and that's when I saw it. A face, pale, blurred like it was pressed against glass under the water. Its features stretched, its eyes too wide, its mouth half open. I jerked back, the light swinging away. My throat went dry, but when I forced myself to look again, the face was still there, and it wasn't alone. One by one, others surfaced in the dark pool. Some were twisted in screams I couldn't hear. Others smiled, wide and wrong, lips stretched too far. Their skin seemed to ripple with the water itself, as if they weren't solid. They didn't move like reflections. They didn't match me or anything above. They just stared. All of them, at me. I gripped the edge of the well until my knuckles ached. My breathing was ragged, too loud in the silence. My mind screamed at me to back away, to run, but I couldn't. Because then, one of the faces moved its lips. I couldn't hear the words, couldn't make out a sound, but I knew. Somehow I knew it was calling me. My stomach turned. Sweat prickled at the back of my neck. And still I leaned closer, straining to catch the shape of its mouth. The others followed, smiles twitching wider, screams stretching longer. Their eyes rolled and blinked in patterns that felt deliberate, as if they were trying to speak without sound. Then, just for a second, I thought I recognized one. A man's face. Half rotted, his features warped but familiar. It looked like someone I'd seen before, years back. A drunk who'd gone missing out in the woods. His name clawed at the back of my throat, though I couldn't say it out loud. Another face shifted beside him, a woman with sunken eyes, her lips twisted in a grin too sharp to be human. And I swore I'd seen her too. At the diner once, years ago. I staggered back, chest heaving. The flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering on the brick. Its beam rolled wild across the square, leaving the well in sudden darkness. And in that darkness, I felt it, all of them, watching. Their eyes locked on me, even unseen. I snatched the light up and swung it back over the rim. The water was calm, empty. No faces. No movement. Just black liquid, flat and smooth as glass. My mind spun, trying to catch up. Had I imagined it? Had exhaustion painted those twisted shapes onto the water? I wanted to believe that. Needed to. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that froze me in place. Wet handprints, dozens of them, smeared across the stone rim. Fingers long, streaked down the sides as if something had tried to climb out. The breath caught in my throat, because they weren't old. They were fresh. The stone was still damp. I stumbled back, my body trembling. The light shook in my hands, skittering across the bricks. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the square itself wanted to keep me there. The silence pressed harder, thicker, and then, faint but clear, I heard it. Water dripping, not from the well, from behind me. I turned slow. The beam sweeping over broken benches, cracked pavement, and the hollow doorways of buildings long dead, and there, across the square, something slipped back into the shadows. I didn't see its shape clearly. Just the wet trail it left behind, dark stains marking the bricks. My whole body went cold. I backed away, step by step, until the well was behind me, until I could force my legs to move. I didn't stop until I was back at the station, door locked, every light on, but even there, I couldn't shake it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces, pressed against the water, smiling or screaming, staring at me with hollow patience, and somewhere deep down, I felt something worse, a knowing that they weren't trapped in the water. Not anymore. I always thought my last shift would be quiet. No emergencies. No calls, maybe a few hours of paperwork before handing over the badge for good. I'd pictured myself driving home in the pale light of dawn, knowing I'd given the better part of my life to this job and that it was finally over. But life doesn't play out the way you expect. That night, the roads were empty. My cruiser rolled slow along the cracked highway, headlights sweeping across weeds that had pushed their way through the asphalt. The town I was driving toward wasn't on most maps anymore. A cluster of streets and buildings left behind when the factories closed, when the families packed up and left for someplace with better chances. Folks called it a ghost town, but around here nobody said that with a laugh. I told myself I was only cutting through on my way back to the station. Just one last drive, nothing more. The radio crackled beside me, the steady hum I'd heard for decades. I didn't think much of it until the static rose sharp, swallowing the dispatcher's voice mid-sentence. I tapped the knob, adjusted the frequency, but the channel stayed dead. Just a wall of hiss, broken now and then by faint bursts, like whispers caught in the static. I spoke into the mic, called out my unit number, asked for confirmation. Nothing came back. It was strange, but not enough to rattle me. Not yet. Radios cut out sometimes. Dead zones. Interference. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of how sudden it had been. 1 second clear as day. The next, silence. The cruiser felt louder without the radio. Every rattle in the dashboard, every sigh of the old heater. My own breathing seemed to echo in the cabin. The road bent, leading me straight into the forgotten town. The first thing I noticed was the stillness. No dogs barking. No wind cutting through the alleys. Not even the faint hum of power lines. Just nothing. My headlights slid over abandoned cars at the edge of the street. Rusted out, flat tires, doors hanging open as if folks had left in a hurry. A bicycle leaned against a fence, its paint faded, chain rusted solid. The houses loomed like hollow teeth, windows black, roofs sagging. It looked less like a town and more like a stage set, frozen in the middle of some play long since abandoned. I slowed the cruiser, my tires crunching against gravel and broken glass. Out of habit, I reached for the radio again. Pressed the button, called dispatch. My own voice filled the cabin, then fell back into static. That's when the thought hit me. I was alone, not just without backup. Alone. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody could hear me. For the first time in my career, that realization didn't feel freeing. It felt like the whole world had narrowed down to me, the car, and that dead town waiting just ahead. I rolled past the old diner. Its sign, once bright and buzzing, now dangled by a single chain, swaying slow in the still air. The windows were coated in grime, menus still taped up inside, letters faded by the sun. I remembered eating there once years ago. Coffee so strong it could strip paint. The waitress with a laugh that carried across the whole room. I wondered what had happened to her. If she'd made it out before this place rotted away. The cruiser's engine hummed low, steady. A comfort I clung to. But then, without warning, it cut. The headlights dimmed. The dash went black, and the engine choked into silence. I sat in the dark, my breath sharp in my throat. The silence returned. Heavier now, I twisted the key. Nothing, not even a click. The radio crackled faintly. One long hiss that rose, dipped, and then cut out completely. I tried again. Harder this time. Still nothing. And in that moment, it hit me. This wasn't just equipment failure. It felt intentional. Like the whole town had swallowed my car, chewed through its wires, stolen its spark. I sat there, gripping the wheel. The empty street stretching around me like veins in a dead thing. My own voice sounded. Too loud when I muttered a curse under my breath. The only sound that answered was the ticking of cooling metal under the hood. And then, something else. A soft sound, faint, carried through the still night. Not static. Not the engine. Footsteps, light, slow, on pavement. My eyes snapped to the rearview mirror. The street behind me was empty, stretching into shadow, but the sound came again. A step, then another. I told myself it was in my head. A trick of nerves, exhaustion, the quiet playing with my ears. Still, I locked the doors. I waited, breath shallow. my eyes darting between mirrors. The steps stopped. The silence came back, heavier than before, like a weight pressing against my chest. I don't know how long I sat there, staring into the dark, waiting for something, anything, to move. Finally, I forced myself out of the car. The night air was colder than I'd expected. My boots scuffed against broken pavement as I stepped out, my flashlight beam cutting across the street. Dust hung in the air, stirred by nothing. The town stretched out before me, hollow and still, and though I couldn't see anyone, the feeling remained. I wasn't alone. Something was listening, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard and told myself I had to keep moving. The station wasn't far, just a few more blocks. I'd call in from there, file the report, get this night over with. That was the plan. But deep down, I knew this night wasn't going to end the way I thought. And whatever had silenced the radio, whatever had killed the engine, wasn't done with me yet, not by a long shot. The town changed when the sun went down. I don't mean in the ordinary way. Most places slip into sleep when darkness falls. Shops close, houses draw their blinds, the world turns inward. But this place, it seemed to wake up. The streets were dead when I drove in, but as the last of the daylight drained away, something shifted. It wasn't noise or movement, not at first. It was in the air, a charge, like the pause before a storm breaks, when the sky holds its breath. The first light came on at the corner of Main and Ash, a single street lamp humming faintly, its glow sickly yellow. I stopped walking, staring up at it. There was no power in this town. I was certain of it. No hum from power lines, no glow from windows, nothing. And yet there it was, buzzing softly like it had been burning all this time. I should have felt relief. Light meant safety, at least in the old logic my brain clung to, but I didn't. My stomach tightened instead. Because that lamp didn't just shine. It pulsed. The glow flickered, steady for a moment, then quick, like a heartbeat racing out of rhythm. I took a step closer, squinting up, and that's when I saw it. The shadow it cast didn't make sense. The light spilled down onto the pavement, stretching long and thin across the cracked street. But instead of matching my outline or the empty frame of a lamppost, it bent, warped. It looked like a figure, no, several crowding together in the spill of light, as if a group stood there shoulder to shoulder. But when I looked back at the ground beneath the lamp, there was nothing. Just a circle of concrete dusted with dirt. Still the shadows remained. I froze, the air tight in my lungs. My hand brushed the grip of my sidearm, not because I thought I'd need it, but because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Then, as if sensing me, the shadows twitched. I stumbled back. The light flickered harder, almost strobing, and the black shapes seemed to lurch forward in broken frames. Not toward me exactly, just shifting, like they were aware of me now. The lamp buzzed louder, then cut out with a sharp pop. Darkness crashed in, and the figures vanished with it. I stood in the dark, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Farther down the street, another light snapped on, then another. One by one, the street lamps bloomed to life, scattered along the blocks like breadcrumbs laid out to pull me deeper. I don't know why I followed. Maybe I told myself I had no choice, that the station sat on the far end of town, and if the lights were the only path, I'd take them. But truth is, I could have turned back. I could have walked the other way. I didn't. I stepped into the next circle of light. It felt different underfoot, heavier somehow. My boots scraped against the pavement, and the sound carried too far, bouncing off buildings that stood silent and hollow. This time, I didn't look at the ground. I looked at the walls around me the way the light hit brick and wood, and sure enough, there they were, shadows that weren't mine. They stretched across windows, across broken fences. Some looked like arms, long and reaching. Others like faces, stretched wide in silent screams. But when I swung my flashlight toward them, nothing was there. Just peeling paint, broken glass, sagging door frames. I forced myself to keep moving. Every few feet, another lamp buzzed alive. Each one carried the same pulse, the same twisted silhouettes that shifted and bent as if breathing. It was like the town itself was watching me. Not as a place, but as a living thing, using the dark to shape its own form. The thought clawed at me as I walked. What if this place wasn't abandoned at all? What if it had simply changed? The night deepened, and the fog I'd seen earlier in patches began to creep low along the sidewalks, curling against the bases of the buildings. My beam of light caught it, glowing faint white before dissolving into the dark. I tried the radio again, raising it to my mouth with hands that weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. "This is Unit 12, I said. My voice sounded small. "Checking in. Anyone copy?" The static returned, low and unbroken. Then, faintly, a voice. I froze. It was quick, just a syllable maybe, swallowed almost immediately by static. But I'd swear it said my name, not my badge number. Not sheriff, my name. I dropped the radio back onto my belt like it had burned me. The next light flickered to life just ahead, buzzing loud. Its glow spilled out over the cracked well I'd noticed earlier in the square. I shouldn't have gone near it, but my feet carried me closer, as if I was tethered. The well's stone rim was chipped, crumbling at the edges. The wood cover that should have sealed it lay splintered beside it. The light above cast just enough glow to reveal the water below, thick, still, black, and in that black I saw movement, not ripples, not reflections. Faces, half-formed, smudged like wet paint. They floated just beneath the surface, mouths opening and closing without sound. Their eyes rolled back, or maybe they were staring up at me. It was hard to tell. I staggered back from the rim, bile burning the back of my throat. The light above flickered wildly, shadows dancing across the stone walls of the square. They twisted and broke apart, stretching into shapes that weren't possible. One shadow stretched up taller than the others, a figure that didn't match anything near it. I stared until my vision blurred, waiting for it to move, to step free from the light. It never did. It never did. The lamp above popped again and went dark. For a moment, the square was gone. No buildings, no well, no pavement, just black. And in that black, I felt it, something shifting, surrounding me. I fumbled for my flashlight, flicking it on with shaking fingers. The beam cut through the dark, landing on empty stone and broken boards. The square was back. The well was back, but I couldn't shake what I'd felt. The town wasn't empty. It was breathing, and every flicker of light was the blink of its eyes. I turned, forcing myself back toward the line of lamps still glowing down the street, each one humming in rhythm like a pulse. One by one, they'd lead me somewhere, but I wasn't sure if it was a way out, or deeper inside whatever this town had become. Do you want me to keep weaving the shadows, behaving as if alive throughout the rest of this story arc? So it escalates toward a climax where the sheriff realizes the town itself might be a sentient trap. I've been a sheriff for over 3 decades. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything a man could see. Violence, grief, strange coincidences. Things that might make you question if there was something more behind this world than what you could touch with your hands. But I never thought I'd find myself here, trapped in a town that should have been forgotten, a town that won't let me leave. That night started simple enough. My last shift. One more drive before I was done for good. The radio had gone out earlier, cutting me off from dispatch, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of loose change in the cup holder. The kind of silence you don't realize is dangerous until it sinks into your bones. When I decided to turn back and leave the place behind, that was when I noticed something wasn't right. I drove down Main Street past the flickering lamps and the empty shops. My headlights stretched across the cracked pavement, catching on old signs and dust-smeared windows. I took the first left, thinking it would take me back to the highway. But the road didn't lead out, it curved. Then it stretched on longer than it should have, bringing me right back to where I started, the town square. At first, I told myself it was fatigue. Maybe I'd missed a turn. Maybe my mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. But I knew these roads, and I had a good sense of direction. There's no way I could have circled back that fast. Still, I tried again. Another turn, a longer stretch. I watched every sign carefully, making sure I wasn't doubling back. But after 10 minutes, there it was again. The square. That damn dry well in the middle, waiting like a wound in the earth. The third time, my knuckles tightened around the wheel. Sweat gathered on the back of my neck, and the air inside the cruiser felt heavier. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew what was happening. I wasn't leaving. Something wasn't letting me. It's strange how the mind tries to protect itself. You tell yourself there's always a logical answer, even when the world starts unraveling. I tried convincing myself the streets were designed in a loop. Maybe some kind of strange urban planning mistake. Or maybe I was more tired than I realized. But deep down, I felt it. That pit in my stomach told me the truth. This place wasn't built like other towns. It was built to keep you in. I pulled the cruiser over near an old diner. Its windows were dark, chairs still stacked on the tables inside, like everyone had left in a hurry and never bothered to come back. I killed the engine and stepped out. The silence outside was worse than the silence inside. At least in the car, there was the hum of the motor. Out here, it was just me, and the faint buzz of those broken streetlights overhead. I walked across the square, my boots echoing against the pavement. Every sound bounced back at me too loud, like the town was listening, watching. The air smelled dry, like dust and rust, with something faint underneath it. Something rotten. I didn't want to follow that scent, so I kept my eyes forward. I reached into my pocket for my phone, thinking maybe I could get a GPS signal, but the screen was black. Not off, black. When I tried to restart it, nothing happened. It was like the device wasn't even a phone anymore, just dead weight in my hand. That was when I saw it, the reflection in the diner window. At first I thought it was me, my own face, drawn and tired, staring back. But then I noticed it wasn't moving the way I was. My reflection's head tilted slightly slower. Its lips parted when mine didn't, and its eyes, God help me, its eyes weren't mine. They were darker, empty, like deep wells swallowing up the faint light around them. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to tell myself I'd imagined it, that the flickering lights had messed with the reflection. But when I turned, I swear I saw movement at the corner of the street. A figure, pale, just standing there under the broken lamp. I called out, instinct, training. "Sheriff's Department!" My voice cracked the silence, harsh and too loud. But the figure didn't move, didn't flinch. It just stood there, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. That was when I ran back to the cruiser. I didn't think. I just moved. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, started the engine, and pulled away from the square as fast as I could. This time, I didn't take any turns. I just drove straight, pedal heavy, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. My headlights carved through the night, illuminating broken fences, weeds growing through the cracks, and houses that looked more like shells than homes. I thought I'd made it. I thought I'd pushed far enough to finally leave. But then, the road curved, bending in on itself like a snake. And there it was again, the square, the well, and standing at the edge of it, a shape. Not one this time, three, all pale, all waiting. I gripped the wheel so tight my fingers ached. My breathing came fast, shallow. I didn't stop. I didn't want to. I drove past them. My eyes locked straight ahead, pretending they weren't there. But I saw them in the rearview mirror. They were closer than they should have been. Their faces, distorted, like stretched photographs. Smiles too wide, eyes too hollow. They didn't walk. They drifted, their bodies swaying like they weren't bound by bones or muscles. And then, for the first time, I heard them. A whisper. Not outside, inside, curling through the back of my mind. My name, over and over. Sheriff. It was so soft, so quiet, but it filled every corner of me. I gritted my teeth and forced my eyes back on the road, refusing to look at the mirror again. But no matter how far I drove, no matter which turn I took, I always came back. The square, the well, the pale faces. It went on like that for what felt like hours. Drive, circle back, see them, hear them, drive again. At one point I screamed, slammed my fist against the steering wheel and shouted into the empty car. But the sound just bounced back at me, swallowed up by the town. I realized then what this place was. A trap. Not just of roads or buildings, but something deeper. Something that fed on me being here, fed on my panic, my desperation. It didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to stay. And maybe it wasn't the first time. Maybe that's why the houses were empty. Maybe that's why the diner was abandoned mid-shift. Maybe others had been caught here before me. People who'd tried to leave, but never could. People who still lingered, waiting, drifting under the broken lamps, staring through dark windows. I don't know how long I drove that night. My memory blurs. Time didn't feel real anymore. The clock on the dash stopped ticking, the fuel gauge stayed stuck, and the night never gave way to morning. Just an endless loop of roads folding in on themselves. But I remember the moment I stopped trying. I pulled into the square one last time, cut the engine, and just sat there, my body shaking, my breath ragged. The pale figures stood around the well, watching, waiting, and for the first time I wondered if I should join them. If maybe that was the only way out, but I'm not ready. Not yet. I'm still here, still fighting, though I don't know how much longer I can. Because in this place, there is no escape.